Right, start recording in three, two, and one. All right, and welcome back to the Reserve Squad Midweek Show, a soccer podcast covering all things in the EPL from a bench perspective. I'm your Spin, and this is your the second part of the Week 21 review. We did Part A last week, and we had the 5 games, and then we'll have Part B this week. And what I'm going to do is a little bit different because normally, basically every show I lead off with Liverpool, City, and Arsenal. Spend a lot of time talking about those 3 teams. Essentially, I'm going to switch it up this week and feature some different teams. I don't always normally feature. Maybe I put at the end and don't really have a lot of time for them. And so I'm going to lead off with Brentford and Nottingham Forest. It also works out because I tried to do one of those kind of mid-season reviews for a bunch of teams, but I haven't gotten to the teams that I've kind of been worried about. The teams in like that uh-oh zone. They're not necessarily at the bottom 3 yet, but they're only a couple points away from getting dragged into something. And both are Brentford and Nottingham Forest, along with Crystal Palace, and there are a couple others. The only 3 that I think I'm not really worried about right now are, let's see, it is Bournemouth, which we which we saw versus Liverpool. Uh, that they lost 4-0 in that game, but for the most part, I think that score was a little misleading. I didn't think that was a 4-0 kind of game. Just a couple of the finishes were just really superb, and then Liverpool were able to get a last one at the very end. But Bournemouth, I'm not really worried about. Fulham, I'm not concerned about anymore. I was, and then I think it's Wolves. But the others, I do think if say Sheffield or Burnley or even Luton are able to go on a run a little bit, just get a couple of wins in the next maybe 4 games. That does bring a lot of these teams into something. Oh, I think it's Everton. Everton's the other one. So I haven't really gotten to speak about Brentford in a long time, or Forest, and so I'm looking forward to this because one, the game was fantastic, and that's not something I normally expect between Nottingham Forest or Brentford. Brentford have been kind of they've been on the slide a lot, but I mean, the leading off story was they got Ivan Toney back, and man, did you see what a difference he makes. I mean, it was Brentford have been on a nightmarish run since around Christmas. But one thing happened because they were leading Aston Villa, and then in that game, Ben Mee was directly sent off, and so they didn't have Ben Mee for about 3 games in a row, and did they miss him, to say the least, because they got destroyed by Wolves. In the following game, they lost to Crystal Palace in a similar fashion. Uh, so they had Ben Memak and they had Tony. They didn't have Jensen for a couple of these games, and you see an important player he is to their midfield to make a lot of things tick. The only negative for them is they're without Norgard for a little bit because he got injured in one of the Wolves FA games. Uh, but and they're without Mapai, they're without Wisa, still without Rico Henry. They're still not necessarily fully healthy, but you can see with Tony back, at least in this game, you can see how Tony and Mapai could maybe work as a little partnership up top, and they maybe have the midfield to supply them, or if not, Tony can drop in like we saw in this game and be some of the supply himself. Nottingham Forest really struggled with the way that Ivan Tony was playing, especially in the second half, because Tony was dropping deep and Nottingham Forest didn't know whether to mark him or to stay. And so Tony was getting on the ball and was basically being the main creator. He's really got a lot of Harry Kane in his game, and his age I think is 27, maybe he's 28. Uh, he really is primed to make a move, and I think Brentford are going to be able to hold on to him at least this at least until the summer. Um, but even with his age, and it's not necessarily like 29 is over the hill. At least in football years, it's entering your prime. But you can see how he immediately helps out a lot of teams because just in this one game, you see what he offers. He got a goal, and that was very controversial. I don't even think it was necessarily that great of a free kick because Nottingham Forest set up with a disaster kind of wall. Tony just had to pass it in. It's not like he even had to lift it. Uh, So he just had to, there was a giant space. The way he was able to move the ball, allowed him to kind of do for this too, which I'll get to. But he had a couple crosses that were nearly finding people. He was dropping in, he was linking, he was quite good. And for his first game back, I didn't know what his fitness was going to be. His fitness was good. I mean, there were a couple of times when maybe he could have gotten onto to a loose ball, making a run behind, and he was just a little slow to get there. So maybe that'll come back as he gets more game shape. But just for his first game back in a long time, no preseason, no nothing, he looked good, and you can see why Brentford have wanted to hold on to him and why, if a team does try to come for him, they're going to have to spend a lot, but it might be worth it. But looking specifically at this game, so we got started with Danilo scoring in the second minute in the game. Brentford just can't really clear the ball. I think it's Janelt has a chance to do something, and he just like boots it in the air. I think it's been me. Then has a header and just heads it right to Danilo. But this still, when Danilo gets it, it's not necessarily that dangerous of a spot. But what happens is he takes a touch with his knee to kind of cushion it, and then with his left knee, and then with his right foot, he strikes it almost on a volley. And this is from a pretty good distance out. And I'm not going to necessarily blame the keeper here. This is just an amazing hit. This is kind of like a video game kind of goal. Um, and not really what Brentford would have wanted, just considering the run of form that they had been in. And then, I kind of talked about it a little bit. Ivan Toney is able to get them back in the game with that free kick. It's been discussed a bunch of times. I'm not necessarily spending a ton of time talking about it. He moves the ball from where the line is. I think it's more a little bit on Nottingham Forest. One, no one in the wall or Nat Turner is able to see what Tony does. Uh, I think the coach after the press game or in the press conference basically alluded to, we have VAR for all this other stuff. Why don't we have VAR for this? Which I think he has a decent point, but at the same time, I think it's the wall that for why this goal happens. There's just a giant space in the wall. I don't really understand what Hudson Odoi is doing other than to allow Matt Turner to see a window and that so he can see the ball. But Turner's beaten, so it doesn't really matter. So we get to 1-1 at halftime, and then Brentford really did explode a little bit, or just the game exploded in the second half. Brentford had a couple of counters, and just Lewis Potter was getting the finish wrong, but he was getting into some really good spaces, and the one cross goes out of bounds, and Brentford get a corner kick, and Ben Mee is able to score off the corner kick, and then. Uh, Nottingham Forest get back at level in the game with a goal by Chris Wood. Hudson Odoi hadn't really done a whole lot before this, and even I believe the commentators were going a little bit at Hudson Odoi, saying he's more inventive and he should be more creative than what he's shown. He's being passive, and within minutes, you actually see Hudson Odoi sent in a very good cross that meets Chris Wood. Uh, Basically, Chris Wood just has to glances. He doesn't necessarily even have to jump. It's a really good run by Chris Wood, too. He basically runs and splits the two Brentford center backs, and there's really nothing that Brentford's keeper can do. This is a really good goal. And then, out of nowhere, we get just as good a goal from Neil Maupay. Maybe even goal of the game. Well, I guess you have to rival Danilo, but this is a really good goal by Maupay as well. Uh, and this is another case of where Brentford are able to use Tony to get other people to go up front, and Tony's able to pick out, I think it's Mats Roslov, who makes a good run ahead. And Roslov, since it's only Neil Maupay, Neil Maupay is being guarded by two Nottingham Forest base really tight on his back. But Roslov still, tries the cross into the box, and Maupay does amazing here. One, the ball is kind of behind him, but it works out, so he's able to get a little touch to cushion it down, and then he spins and shoots, and it goes into the corner. This is an amazing turn by Maupay and a great goal. And so there you go. I mean, when Tony was dropping, Brentford it wasn't like they were both dropping at the same time because Maupay sometimes likes to come to the ball too. But here, you always had someone, whether or not it was Maupay or Tony, it was really Tony. You always had someone that was still in the box ahead for something forward, something to cross into. Maupay isn't necessarily tall or physical, but Well, I shouldn't say that. He's not necessarily tall, but he can be physical. And he's clever, and he likes annoying center backs when he is in the box. And this is maybe something where someone like Embremo, if he was playing, he would look to try to do more runs. Maybe he would go more on the wing. This worked out, or maybe this Wiseau could have maybe done something like this. But for them, Brentford not having either of those two players, you wondering if Tony back was going to be enough. And with Maupay and him, maybe that will be enough. I mean, Nottingham Forest also went into this game not necessarily at full strength either. They're without Anthony Elanga, who I think is at African Cup of Nations. Morgan Gibbs-White is at African Cup of Nations too. I thought he was British. Uh, and Nottingham went into this having some pretty good results. In fact, they were down in the FA Cup tie a couple of weeks ago, and basically came back scoring 3 goals in the second half. Nottingham, and they were able to, I guess, I think they actually led to a draw, and they were able to advance, I guess, versus Blackpool in, I guess, the replay. So Nottingham Forest have and they're starting to score a lot more goals than they did, and show some good attacking intent than they did with Steve Cooper. So the hiring of Nuno Espirito Santo has been quite good, and I know when he was hired, he wasn't necessarily the everyone's cup of tea. I guess you could say Nottingham Forest fans' cup of tea. But this is important too because while Nottingham Forest have been in a pretty good run of form over the weekend, or I guess maybe last week, or I guess since the last time I did a show, it's come out that they might be looking at financial fair play issues. Maybe I mentioned it last week, but uh, no one really knows what's going to happen if there are going to be points deductions or not. So there's just like a hearing scheduled. Everton are kind of in this as well, and so regardless of how good Nottingham Forest have been in as far as form goes, if they were to get some kind of sanctions against them, some kind of points deduction, how much different would that change? Also, I think I've seen that they are in the running now to maybe sign Gio Reyna, which would be quite interesting. I don't necessarily know how much Reyna would help as opposed to Morgan Gibbs White in that kind of 10 role, but I would like to see it. As an American, Gio Reyna hasn't been playing at Dortmund, and no one really understands why. Because when he has the few minutes that he has gotten to play with Dortmund, he's looked good. For some reason, he hasn't been clicking with the manager, and that relationship has been really stale over the last year. So, and it's not just because he's trying to baby him. It's not. Reyna has been struggling with injury this year. He just hasn't really gotten minutes, and so I would like to see what he has to offer. Coming into the league, it's a physical league, so I don't necessarily know how much his body would hold up, but he is a bigger lad than say a Christian Pulisic, different player as well. I would like to see if he could handle this. It would be good for American soccer as well. So hopefully we kind of see that. It wouldn't be necessarily great if he comes on to a team that is immediately sent into a relegation zone, because that would put some pressure, and maybe he wouldn't get as much playing time. But who knows what they have in the cards? Nottingham Forest were also without let's see, without Willie Bolly, so they went into this game actually with a brand new center back to debut. His name was Ama Baladi, and he made a couple of times where he got suckered in when Tony was kind of dropping, and so I mean, you can't. It was just only his debut, so you can't really go at him that much. Then Nuno Tavares, former Arsenal fullback, was on one side, and then Montiel, the World Cup winner with Argentina, on the other side. I mean, other than Amabali, if you imagine with Willie Bolly, that's a decent back line. Uh, and they have Toffolo, they have some other players as well to kind of try. They have a Nico Williams if Tavares isn't necessarily working out. So that's not terrible. And then Mangala has really shown me something in the last couple of games. I think I mentioned him last week. I thought he had a pretty good game in this one as well. He had a foul that basically drew the free kick that Tony scored on, but I don't think Tony should score on that free kick. And I think Mangala actually does a good job to foul Damsgaard when he does. Because otherwise Damsgaard's going to get into the box, and that's going to be an even worse situation. So he basically ate a yellow card, but You also saw him getting to really good spaces in the second half, and he's tidy on the ball. He doesn't necessarily lose it, and he's weirdly progressive with his thought process. So I liked what I saw. I liked the Danilo and Mangala and kind of Yates, midfield three partnership. And maybe the only negative for Forrest is Ryan Yates got a bit of a nick and wasn't able to really continue on past maybe the 70th minute mark. And Forrest struggled a little bit after, or I guess with Yates struggling. Maybe he should have come off even before that. And then Dominguez and Hudson Odoi. So you don't have Elenga, you don't have really any of your first choice kind of attackers here. And Hudson Odoi is going to get some time to maybe prove himself. He's another player that he's gone to Germany. It didn't work out in Germany. He hasn't really worked out when he was at Chelsea. There was a lot of promise about him when he was a youth player, and unfortunately for him, he suffered a pretty bad Achilles injury a couple of years ago, and it seems he hasn't necessarily recovered from that, and he doesn't necessarily have his pace. And someone like Eberechi Eze on Palace has suffered a similar kind of injury. It hasn't affected him nearly the same way. So unfortunately for Hudson Odoi, he used to be lightning quick, and he's just not anymore. Um, I don't necessarily know if he doesn't trust his body or what, but he seems really really passive. But you see what he does offer because he did have a couple really good deliveries into the box in that second half. So there's some of that as well. And with Brentford with Tony back, Brentford were able to play a bit of a lineup that Thomas Frank has probably wanted to play more often than not. In this kind of a game without Tony, maybe you even see a 4-3-3. But instead, Brentford went with that 3-5-2. They gave Nottingham Forest kind of a little bit of respect. They had been me back, and they were able to play their three CBs in a line with Pinnock, Collins, and me. Roslov and Lewis Potter were the wingbacks, which I thought was interesting. I kind of went at Roslov, I think maybe last week's episode, not necessarily to attack him, but I just felt that at least when he's played as a fullback, he hasn't necessarily offered a ton, at least with the ball, or he just has seemed a little bit out of place at times. In this game, he was good, so I'll give him credit for that. And then Lewis Potter as a wingback was interesting as well. You didn't really know how that was going to work, but he made some pretty good runs, and he was kind of the heart of everything good that Brentford were doing in the second half. So that worked out. Damsgaard, Janelt, and Jensen as the midfield three. Damsgaard is getting a couple chances to prove himself now. He's getting some game time. I'm liking what I'm seeing. He's doing a little bit better when he gets on the ball. He made a couple really good runs actually him and Roslov do a little 1-2 together to to free themselves and to get basically to they were able to create a little attacking moment, and that's basically what drew the free kick. So that was quite good. And Yano is playing in a position that he seems to be like a five tool kind of knife where he can just play him anywhere on the field. He's played at fullback in a couple of these, but here he's not really a holder by himself, and he's good on the ball. But you can also see him sometimes getting suckered in, and maybe he presses someone that he's not really supposed to, leaving that space. And sometimes Nottingham Forest were able to exploit that a little bit. That's what my buddy Jeremy was texting me too. And then Tony and Malpai together, and so we got to see a relatively healthy Brentford. It's not full. I mean, no Embremo, no Wisa, no Norgard, but for the most part, everything else, no weaker Henry. But for the most part, this wasn't terrible. And so to get started, I mentioned the kind of goals that the Danilo goal, so I don't necessarily have to do that. I do think it was good that Brentford did well to somewhat take a sting out of the game after conceding. Forest weren't necessarily able to get a ton of touches near the Brentford box after that, though they did get a chance in the 12th minute. But for the most part, yeah, it's not like they allowed Forest to just kind of control the game and kind of created them a little bit. And then here, Forest do have a chance, but it comes after Brentford having an attack. There's a nice ball by Jensen. But there's a long ball to Chris Wood, and there's a pass to the top of the box. I think it's a teammate who finds Hudson Odoi, but the shot is blocked by Collins being big, so that was dangerous. And then it looked like Forest actually did have a little bit of control by the 17th minute, and this is what leads to the free kick. So the Forest are just kind of passing the feet, lulling Brentford to sleep a little bit. And then Moreo tries to hit Dominguez, making a run in behind, but it's read by Brentford. And then it looks like Forest have Brentford cornered, only for Brentford to play through trouble with a really nice 1-2 between Janelt, Roslov, and Damsgaard. Damsgaard continues his run, passing it to Roslov on the touchline, and then Mangala basically fouls Damsgaard before he can get into the penalty area. So I think it was actually pretty good play by Mangala here. But it's good quick football by Brentford to just play through Forest, being a little aggressive towards them, and they punish them a little bit. Mangala does do the foul, but I also think Hudson-Odoi falls asleep here and loses Damsgaard, slipping in behind him. So it was a good play by Damsgaard, and there's a little touch by Radoslav on the touchline to find Damsgaard. So good play by both of them, and so that draws the free kick, and Brentford score on the free kick with Tony. And everyone's seen what he does. He moves the ball just a few inches to the right from where the line is. In fact, he finds a way to somewhat move the line a little bit with his hand to make it seem like it was always there. And no one sees it. No one in the wall sees it. Matt Turner doesn't see it. The ref doesn't see it. So uh, you hear commentators all the time defend players diving if it rewards a team a PK because everything is about finding a competitive advantage to help your team win. And for some reason, I don't necessarily know if because people have it out for Tony, maybe they don't respect him gambling. There were a lot of people that went after him for this, and I think it's more on the refs and players. It's not necessarily like Tony did something where no one else would have been able to do anything about it. And if people were paying attention, this doesn't happen. And also, I think what Nuno said after the game, where why don't we have VAR to look at this? I think there's a fair argument for that as well. But that said, the wall is terrible. Hudson Odoi is leaving a giant space. They only have four in the wall, and then they have Hudson Odoi standing like I don't know 3 or 4 feet away. So there's a giant space there for Tony to just basically pass it into the corner. As long as he gets the power right and the hit right, he doesn't even have to lift it. Like I said, there's just no one there. And I can only assume that he did this so Turner could see the ball when it's kicked. But it doesn't really matter because Turner's late to react. So there you go. And I think they even said that Tony scored a free kick the last time he played Nottingham Forest. I think they said Tony actually scores every time he plays Nottingham Forest. So that's kind of funny. And then there's a serious chance where right before halftime where Brentford basically hit the bar, and this is such a well worked designed corner kick. So here's where you see Brentford basically enjoying that Ivan Toney is back. So let's see. Do, do, do. So this is the Brentford of old to me, basically where they were able to bully teams a little bit in the air or just bully teams in the box. So what happens is they have everyone kind of just starts in a line and everyone runs in a different direction, but Tony is able to slip in behind. It's almost like a screen for him to run to the back post, and the ball is directly hit to the back post. So this is by design. Tony's able to keep it from going out of bounds, and he's able to basically square it a little bit into the box. I think it takes a touch off Yanelt. Maybe Yanelt's trying to just flick it to someone ahead of him, and Potter is able to quickly get on it and makes a turn and has a great shot. And he does everything right here. It's just denied by the crossbar. But it's also really lucky too because even after hitting the crossbar, it bounces off Matt Turner and it looks like it's about to roll in. Turner does really well, to be honest, to keep this from crossing the goal line. So this is a pretty good save. Went at Turner a little bit for the free kick. He was good here. Uh, and then let's see, the corner kick basically came from a really nice bend me pass to find Malpai just making a run in behind. So here you see Malpai isn't necessarily able to beat the defender, but at least that threat to run in behind it freaks the defender out to kick it out of bounds for the corner kick. But Ben Mee in a number of these attacks was really good on the ball, and you see not just defensively what he offers. He's a passer in a way that maybe Brentford don't always have at the back. And Pinnock and Collins to me have sometimes been. I think hesitant to try to play passes upfield. It's basically more kind of clear ball when they play. Ben Mee has a little bit more of an idea when on what he's trying to do, in my opinion, and they enjoyed him being back to say the least. So the halftime thought was Brentford are showing the ability to not just go long again, but also keep the ball. But at the same time, they weren't really posing a ton of questions. But that changed in the second half. So here is when I'm going to go in a little bit more detail because it just kind of exploded around like the 54th minute. So there's a really good cross by Tony to pick out Lewis Potter making a run in behind. It's just the shot is right at Turner. But this is where you really start to see Tony starting to escape defenders trying to mark him. He's just finding open pockets anywhere in the field to get the ball. uh, to where basically he can start attacks. And the second half really showed how much what Tony has to offer outside of his just goals and PKs. And then a couple minutes after that, Mengele has a near brilliant back heel, almost Bernardo Silva like. It's a really nice run into the box, and it's a good pickup by Danilo. Mangelo did this a couple times in the second half. He was making quite well timed runs that Brentford weren't really picking out, and if not, I mean, you can't really go at him for the back heel. He did have a couple chances where maybe he could have finished better, but I don't really think he's a goal scorer. He was close though on a number of these of just missing wide by a couple of inches. Uh, and then in the 56th minute, we have Lewis Potter having another shot. This one's blocked or kind of a scuffed, but it's another reason to highlight this because of what Tony does. So he comes for the ball and then plays it to Roslov, making a run behind him. Forrest don't pick it up, and Roslov has a really nice cross into the box that Malpai basically dummies, and Potter probably could do better, but he just scuffs the shot. But a graph showed at this point, and it was touches in the opposition box, and Brentford 18, Forest 9. For the most part, it felt like Forest were kind of controlling the game a little bit. But it wasn't really they weren't controlling it in the kind of, final third opposition area, and frankly, the way that Brentford were playing in the second half, possession flipped a little bit, and this game kind of ended relatively even when it comes to possession, which was, that's usually both teams usually play a lot without the ball, and both were somewhat trying to win it and trying to have possession themselves. So that was pretty good to see actually from both teams, to be honest. I think we've seen Nottingham Forest have a different identity already in a few games with Espirito Santo than we saw with Steve Cooper, and with Brentford just getting Ivan Toney back is like a shot of I don't know, Gatorade or whatever you would like to say. He gives them belief in a way that maybe they didn't have. So in the 58th minute, we have the corner that basically Ben Mee scores. And again, this comes from Tony getting a pass from Ben Mee before colliding into a Forest defender where Lewis Potter is able to run onto the loose ball. And then thanks to Dominguez for not picking up. So unfortunately for Forest, the reason why Brentford were able to make these runs behind in the second half were the wide players, Dominguez and Hudson-Odoi, were not following the runs from the wingbacks of Brentford. Uh, that sometimes happens with a lot of these teams, unfortunately, and it doesn't necessarily hurt them at least because the cross goes out of bounds, but Brentford score on the cross or on the corner kick. But what happens here is the way how they get this chance. Brentford are cornered, and it looks like basically Collins is if Collins gets the ball, and there's actually a player right near him. I think it's Chris Wood, and usually Collins boots this out of bounds or boots this upfield, and it's just kind of, okay, we'll just get possession away. Collins instead tries to pick out a teammate. I think it's Ben Mee, and he plays it to Ben Mee on the touchline, and then from there, it looks like Forest maybe have a chance to turn the ball over, and Ben Mee is able to pick out that pass to Ivan Toney, and Tony basically he's an outlet, and then he gets the ball and basically he's able to pass it to Lewis Potter before being basically clattered into by I think Omadabale, the center back of Forest, and so this is different than what we normally see from Brentford. And this is really good play, and the play is rewarded by getting the corner kick. And Ben Mee has a little part in the build up, and he scores. He scores on the corner kick, and I thought Brentford were way more threatening and forward thinking in the second half. And again, what you saw was Ivan Toney playing a role of dropping deeper to link play forwards, creating a couple of breakaway chances with runners in behind, getting those wing backs to make those runs in behind. And another thing too is when he was dropping deeper, because he was receiving the ball basically around the midway line, Brentford were having additional numbers in midfield. Ryan Yates, I thought, was struggling fitness wise, and so it was just hard. Forest were already dealing, I thought, with number issues a little bit before this, and here it only made things worse. Forest were pretty good in possession, but out of it, they were struggling a little bit. Now, again, it's not necessarily they're the full the first choice team that you think Espirito Santos would have wanted. Maybe with Cooper, to be honest, maybe he would have made this a lot more ugly, and this wouldn't have been. They would have played a lot more people behind the ball, and Brentford wouldn't have been able to create some of these chances. So there could be there's give and take and how you set up and decide to play. But Forest were also able to score a couple goals where I don't think they would have with the keeper. So a couple ways to look at that as well. And they do score a really good goal with Chris Wood in the 76 minutes, and it's a great Hudson Odoi cross. And it's again, it's minutes right after the commentator was like, "I want to see more from Hudson Odoi." Because he had been passive, and it's a great ball kind of sent in. But I think another thing too, is it's only possible because of the work that Danilo does to win the ball back, and I think he wins a challenge even before that, and then he's able to get it to Hudson Odoi, alone on the wing. He's been able to free himself a little bit from Roslov. Roslov is too late to recognize and to close down, and he has a free cross, and the cross is just perfect. But it's also a really good run by Chris Wood, and he's able to make that run to basically split the two center backs on Brentford, and no one necessarily picks him up, but the run is really good, and the ball is perfect, and he's just able to just glance it into the corner. And then there was a couple of chances for Mangala. So the first one, the shot is just wide, but this is also a really nice layoff by Chris Wood. Brentford are caught on the counter, and it's another good ball sent in by Hudson Odoi. So Hudson Odoi, crosses into the box. Chris Wood is able to collect it, and he has a little layoff to Mangala. And Mangala tries just an outside the boot kind of shot, and it just misses the upper 90. And then there was a chance where Chris Wood plays a provider to set up Mangala for a chance, top of the box. And again, he does everything great here, but he just drags the finish wide. This one was low, and basically, I think it even hits the goalkeeper's water bottle. It was that close. And here he doesn't when Mangala gets the ball, he doesn't really have time to get the shot because the players all around him. So he does good to actually just get the shot off quick and try his luck. And it doesn't necessarily come off, but it was close, and I liked the idea. And that came in the 78th minute, and I think even before that, Brentford do get the third with Maupay, and I think I mentioned it a little bit, but again, I'll mention how this came about because of what Ivan Toney does is really good, and again, he does have a lot of Harry Kane in him, and what I mean by that, when he drops it, when he drops, he's not just looking to link play up to get it forward. Uh, he can be a bit of a I won't say a controller, a bit of a playmaker. He can be a bit of like a number 10 kind of player, to not just maybe do a through ball here and there, but to either go long if that's in, maybe do a long cross, or to play to pass to other teammates' feet, and that's what he does here. And so this starts with a great pass by Ben Mee to pick out Tony again. Ben Mee with a really good vision as well. Ben Mee's on the touchline. He's able to pick Tony out in the middle of the field, and then Tony is able to keep his head up. And what he does is he shifts the ball to his left foot to create basically a better passing angle, and he's able to thread in Mads Roslov on the opposite wing with his left foot. So he shows he can play with both feet here. And then Roslov tries his luck to send in a hopeful cross into the box. Marpai is guarded by two people all over him, and he was able to win that battle with a clever flick. And then he has a really nice turn just to get something on goal, and it's able to fly in the corner past Matt Turner. And one thing I can say is, I think it was even his debut. Mapai nearly scored a very similar goal versus Nottingham Forest in extra time in that October meeting. It might have, I think it was his debut, and that was a terrible game. There was maybe one goal in it. I thought maybe it was even scoreless. I just remember it just being really, really dull. Yeah, Steve Cooper, Forest. They were good at setting up and just being hard to break through, but also didn't care about having the ball, and it was just really, really rough to see. But that game, Brentford did struggle. Now they didn't have Ivan Toney, but I do remember Malpai having a chance where it was it was very very late in the game where he got the ball, had a quick turn, had the shot, and it was either blocked or he'd hit the post. So Malpai has this in a game, and it's a pretty good skill to have to be able to get the ball collected and then quickly turn and get a shot away because it's harder when you're able to turn and shoot. It's harder for a keeper to react because you're not really able to predict that. Uh, and so for the stats we have, Brentford 1.2, Nottingham 1.2 as well. Brentford with 11 shots and 5 on target. Nottingham Forest 12 shots and 3. The shots don't really tell the story because this game was very end to end. There were a lot of chances for both teams. I think 3 big chances even for Brentford and 3 missed, but mostly on Lewis Potter. Lewis Potter had a couple of chances to really, I don't necessarily score a hat trick, but at least score 1 or 2. Not to downplay what Lewis Potter did because he was you need to have those runs for those chances to happen. But in this game, both teams could have had 20 plus shots. Just sometimes they weren't necessarily getting the final ball right in the final third, but this game was really open in a way. Again, I don't really remember a Nottingham Forest game being this open. And Brentford were playing with basically, I don't want to say a back five, but we were playing with three center backs and slightly more defensive than usual. And they were allowing themselves to be open a little bit on the counter as well. So it was quite entertaining for the neutral. And again, I don't normally say that from either of these teams. Brentford with 344 with 75% passing. That's slightly higher than they normally are. And then Nottingham Forest for 481%. And that is a giant improvement from what we normally see with Cooper. So to get started with Brentford, Ivan Toney's back, and what I put down is it's like an adult not riding a bicycle for a long time. You know, eventually you it doesn't take long to remember how to do it, but it's also it is a better understanding of how each other wants to play. Their way of advancing the ball has significantly improved already in just one game. His hold up play, his link up, his runs. He's got a great crossing delivery, and really he is all around. And so the Ivan Toney and Malpai partnership is going to be a fun way to see how this goes for the next couple of games. Whether and again, the reason why it works is if Ivan Toney is going to drop, and he likes being a player to have the ball again, like Harry Kane has become accustomed to do. You need to have someone that's ahead at all times, no matter what, and that's what allows here. Brentford were without Norgard, and so how is he going to? He's been playing Janelt to kind of be in there too, and they were okay in possession, but there were a couple of times when he did seem to be played out of it a little bit, whether or not he was trying to press someone or maybe he went to go for a challenge and was missed, and Nottingham Forest were able to get behind him, and that's when you can kind of see some danger. Jensen back has been key, and he was missing a few games. I think he was able to play. He was able to return with Crystal Palace. I think maybe around Christmas time, maybe Boxing Day, and you see what he has to offer. He's quietly one of the better passers in the league, and sometimes Brentford don't necessarily have a lot of that. Sometimes Brentford are just a lot of high energy, but sometimes they aren't necessarily able to control games, and it's very chaotic. Jensen helps them at least keep a little possession. Norgard does as well when he's able to play. I liked what I saw with Lewis Potter as a wingback, and we don't necessarily know how often he's going to get played this kind of role. Apparently, they brought in Sergio Regulon. I mentioned him last week as kind of an option that some teams should go for, and it looks like Brentford have actually done it. So, and he's more kind of I guess accustomed to that kind of role. So I don't know if the idea is to kind of switch them on and off if they maybe play if they go back to a kind of either a 3-4-3 or if they go back to a 4-3-3, you can have Regulon as a fullback, and I guess Lewis Potter, I guess, as a third attacker. Maybe Tony and Mapai as the guy on the right side on the wing. We don't necessarily know how that's going to work, but it's just good for them to have some kind of just some kind of depth at least in that possession. And Regulon, I don't think he necessarily got the best stint at United. I think I mentioned it even last week. There was a game when he played versus Brighton. I thought he was quite good versus Brighton. Um, he is attack minded, so maybe you can get him a little bit defensively, but at the same time, Brentford just need players that can hold on to the ball and do something with it. They don't have enough of that. So Lewis Potter showed he can offer that, and he made some pretty good runs. And on a different day, maybe he does score. And you have Regulon to at least back that up a little bit. I don't know if it's a loan or if they bought him, but they've needed something since they lost Rico Henry. And I think I mentioned it last week. Teams that have struggled with the fullback or wingback position this year are teams that have just struggled in general. They haven't had their consistency, and those have been the teams that have been hurting, and the teams that have had a little more, I guess, stability and basically more all around the playmakers in that role are the teams that are closer, that are higher up in the table. Not Man City, Man City excluded. So I like to seeing that. And then on the other side, this was probably Roslov's best game in a while, and so that's good to see. I don't necessarily know if he had more freedom to just kind of attacking freedom as a having a third center back behind him, but it was good to see. And the only negative is maybe he picked up a little of an injury, so we had to see Christoph Ayer come on a little bit to end the game. But for the most part, this was better from him. because it's not just he was bombing forward and just crossing the ball at will. He had some nice link up plays with a Dams card. So mention that as well. And then I did feel like there were a lot of reasons for concern before this game, but I do think this maybe calmed some nerves. And it is funny how remarkable Tony looked just in that game. And so w- one thing that I haven't been able to do is just kind of run down a little bit how their last month has been. So they're on 19 points, 20 games, I guess 21 games played now. Uh, No, I guess I haven't updated this. So they were on 19, so I guess I'm on 22. And then so they were in 6th place. Maybe they've gone up a little bit. And they did so with the Nottingham Forest game, that was big because they're close to each other in the table. Um, so they lost 4-1 to Wolves, and then they lost 3-1 to Crystal Palace, and they weren't competitive in either game. They didn't have Jensen for a couple of those. They had Lewis Potter actually score with at least for Crystal Palace. They got the opening goal, but then basically Eberechi Eze and then Olise just kind of went to town and basically two man two man gamed Brentford and just kind of just kind of knocked him out. Another thing too is you really did see that they were light at the fullback spot. They were trying Godos at fullback, and Godos versus Elise just is not the matchup that they would have wanted. And this was a game that reminded you that Brentford don't have a creative player that can do stuff on the ball like Eze or Elise. At least with Malpai being out. And the only thing I was thinking about is maybe Lewis Potter, it can be in that mold, or Damsgaard if Frank would allow them to play that kind of role. They were able to draw Wolves in the FA Cup game, but the negative is they got the early goal, and they also got an early red card because of the tackle on Norgard. And Wolves down a man were able to come back and win that game, and then Wolves I think won the replay 3-2. So at least Brentford won't have to worry about I guess FA Cup because it seems right now the idea is just kind of a if you with holding on to Tony, just stay in the league, and then they'll have a really big summer ahead of them, no doubt. But one thing to say too was Mapai scored in really all three of these games. So Mapai has started or had been showing that he can be a little bit reliable. At least putting the ball at least on goal and maybe past the keeper. So how was Brentford going to rebound a little bit from this? And I do think the scary thing, at least before this Nottingham Forest game, was how really uncompetitive that they had looked in a number of these, and they were without Ben Mee. And so the key stats going into this, the goal scored, I guess this was before. I haven't updated this, so that's on me. The goal scored, they were on 24, so I guess they're on 27. I had them at 12th. I don't necessarily know where they are now. They had conceded 24 goals as well. They were only sixth for that. But the top scorer had been Bremer on 7 goals, then Jensen on 4, and then Weiser on 3. And you're missing Weiser to away to African and Cup of Nations, and then Bremer to a pretty bad injury that they might not have till March. So, and then players of the season, I did have Nordgaard, but he's hurt now. I think I'm gonna put Jensen to this point, and I think given the way that Brentford played without Ben Mee, I think you'd have to put Ben Mee down. So just the question is can Brentford have to do to stay up? And again, the injuries have decimated them, but everyone is dealing with injuries. And Jeremy even told me that it really wasn't until Rieger Henry that they really did kind of break the team. So having a Regulon back, I do think makes sense. That way, you can maybe play Godos or Janelt maybe in a more natural position. Late in the game, we actually saw Josh Da Silva come on. We saw Baptiste come on, and when Brentford just they need legs to maybe be pressers or need people to make some runs, they can do a job too. And they haven't had Josh Da Silva for a lot of this season as well. I almost forgot they even had him. So maybe there'll be something in the cards for them. And you have someone like Jensen who can be a pretty good passer on the ball. You have Damsgaard who seems he can do some things for them as well. And so it hasn't just been losing Rico Henry. They've been without Aaron Hickey for a lot of this. So they've been without skilled fullbacks. And again, basically it makes a team naked if you don't have that. And so that's good. I mean, I was wondering before they did anything with Regulon, a different Spurs player. I was wondering if Horberg would be a decent idea. Maybe with Jensen back, you don't necessarily need him because Horberg hasn't necessarily been playing a lot with Spurs, but with the injuries and with the African Cup of Nations participants with Sarr and Basuma that Spurs have. You don't have Madison back yet. They're a little light a little bit in midfield too. So it looks like him and Skip are going to be kind of the first choice players, at least holding players for Ange Postecoglou. So maybe they won't want to get rid of Horberg, even though I think his contract is running down. I was wondering if, or with Betancourt. Betancourt is another one that they have back. So I was wondering if maybe Brentford could maybe go for him. It is a little bit of that Danish connection, but you just feel Damsgaard is going to be on Denmark's team, probably starting. Norgard is Danish. You'd have all three of them potentially playing, and I do think Højbjerg would get into Brentford's first choice midfield somehow because he's quite good on the ball, and it's someone. That's all you need really is someone to make good enough decisions on the ball and not lose it. You don't necessarily have to score goals. You don't have to necessarily create for others. Just being able to do that is a lot, and just find a way to advance the ball to attackers. Maybe you don't have to have Tony dropping all deep, and he can be a little bit more forward and play a little bit without the ball. So I was wondering if they could maybe do something to that, and I was wondering what is Tony back going to mean for them, and we just saw that he answers a lot of questions or he calms a lot of nerves that I think Brentford fans maybe had. So we'll see how long he's able to stay fit and if he can go the whole season. And he didn't. Oh, he scored, but you don't necessarily want to say that's necessarily repeatable. But he, all of the things that he was doing was really really good, as I've already mentioned. So yeah, I think with him back, Brentford should be okay. And then with Nottingham Forest, again, the coach highlighted the free kick afterwards, and I don't think he's wrong. I mentioned how the wall is pretty bad, but I think we can there's some sudden positives with Nottingham Forest. Chris Wood looks a different player since Nuno has arrived, and he wasn't really playing when the last few games with Steve Cooper. He was on the bench and fit and available, and he wasn't really playing. No Anthony Elanga, no Tyrone Awani, no Gibbs White, and they still gave Brentford a lot to deal with. So I think that's positive. I thought Mangala again was superb. He had that maybe the foul for Damsgaard with the mistake, but I thought he was great after that. You do wonder, is Matt Turner good enough? Unfortunately, but the other guy isn't. The guy behind Matt Turner was getting a couple times to prove himself before this, and he doesn't necessarily look great either. They don't have Keylor Navas this year, and Hudson Odoi. You saw some positives, some negatives. I don't think he does necessarily enough defensive work. So if you're not going to necessarily be that great offensively, the least bit you can do is track a runner and make sure that a wing back isn't wide open. And Roslav was quite dangerous in that second half because of that. So Nottingham Forest we got 20 points with 20 games played. I guess 21 games played. So they're in 15th. Uh, they lost 1-3-2 to Bournemouth. This was the Solanke hat-trick game, and this feels like forever ago. But they played well in that game. In fact, they were leading 2-1 or 2-0 after Willy Bali basically got a red card, with two yellows, like 10 minutes into the game. So they played well in that game. And then they beat Newcastle. This was the Chris Wood hat-trick game when they were also losing in the beginning. I think Ishak got a PK really early on. But what's funny enough is Chris Wood wasn't even playing for Steve Cooper, and he gets a hat-trick here. He scored a couple of really good goals in this game too. Not just one-touch finishing where you expect just to kind of a nine to finish chances. He was able to go around the goalie and showed there were a couple different ways that he scored. So he showed a variety of ways to score that I think was quite good, and he showed pretty good pace to him. So because it's always been kind of weird that he's come in. He's had Nottingham Forest when they had Owani, they have Divock Origi who hasn't necessarily worked out, and Chris Wood's just kind of been. I don't necessarily disrespected, but he hasn't maybe been. Maybe that would be the word for it. Newcastle bought him off Burnley just to kind of screw Burnley over, and then he didn't necessarily work for Newcastle, and then Nottingham Forest brought him over, and he hasn't necessarily gotten a lot of game time either. But he's maybe a little bit better than what people think. I don't necessarily think he's. I've seen the comparison like Andy Carroll, who was also a Newcastle player before he went to Liverpool. He's showing that he can score in other ways. He's not just someone that's going to cross something in where he can only use his head, and he's got shovels for his feet. He seems to have pretty good feet, and he had some pretty good link up play in this game to set up Mangala. So I think that's positive. Elanga and Gibbs White have been shining too, and you saw that for the game versus Man United, and they were able to beat Man United with a really good goal by Dominguez, and then Rashford able to equalize, and then Gibbs White with a really good goal. And again, this was kind of another case where Ryan Yates and Danilo midfield pivot was a little bit different, and they bossed Man United. Danelo's a player that hasn't really been playing or hadn't been playing with Steve Cooper. Neither had Dominguez. Again, so and both did quite well in that game as well. And then they were able to get by Blackpool. It was 2-2, so that wasn't necessarily great, but they were able to beat them in the replay, and Nottingham Forest is still alive. And so goal scored, we have 22, I guess on 24 now, 15th. I guess I shouldn't say necessarily the places because it is a little dated. It's conceded 34 goals. That's not great. 17th. Top scorer, though, is Wood on 7 goals, and then Alanga on 4, and Awani on 4. People maybe forget how good Awani is, and all you have to do is watch what he did the last 10 games for them last season. Basically, he kept them up. Now, it wasn't Steve Cooper and his tactics of just playing everyone behind the ball. It was Awani scoring at a high clip for those final 10 games. And the first game of the season, he just destroyed Arsenal. People maybe forget about that. So his miss has been pretty big, and Chris Wood is maybe starting to capitalize a little bit on that. If Iwani returns, maybe he doesn't necessarily get immediately put into the starting 11 if things are going with Chris Wood. And you look at just how these are just a few of the results that they've been able to do with Santo coming in, and I think already it looks like it was the right call to get rid of Cooper. And the only thing now is how are they going to survive if the points deductions do happen? And it seems like this is just a disagreement over when Brendan Johnson was sold. If they did it in time, essentially. So a lot of interesting things here. Nottingham Forest started this game being ahead of Brentford, obviously with the points deductions in play, or Brentford just beating them heads up. Brentford are in a much better, stronger spot after this game than they were going into it, to say the least. And then the other teams I haven't really, or the other team I haven't really spent a lot of time talking about has been Sheffield, and Sheffield and West Ham gave us a pretty good game too. West Ham have a ton of people that are just not available. They don't have, but at the same time, one door opens or one door closes for someone, and it opens for another. And that's been the case for Maxwell Cornet, who was quite a good player for Burnley before he got hurt. He made that move to West Ham, and we only able to see him for a couple of games before he picked up a really weird injury that just kept relapsing a little bit on him. He had some kind of a, I think, infection that basically lasted more than a year. So it's good to see him back, and he scored a great goal here. I think they even said it was his first goal scoring for the club, which didn't make that kind of surprised me because I thought I remember him scoring versus for Chelsea, but maybe the goal was ruled off. But he was a game changer when he was at Burnley. He didn't necessarily score a ton, and maybe it was only like 6 for the season, but they were like spectacular goals. He's got quite the good shot on him. And with West Ham without Mo Kudus was doing basically the same thing, scoring miraculous goals versus Salah's Egypt. And it looks like I guess the positive for that is positive for West Ham fans is kind of were knocked out because apparently the goalie made a couple of mistakes. So they're gonna get Mo Kudus back, and so Cornet can maybe be an option. Uh, they don't have Antonio still, but they're still trying to play Bowen a little bit in the kind of central role, and then Kudus, and they have Ings hasn't necessarily worked out for them. Buying him from Aston Villa, maybe he hasn't been fit, but he hasn't necessarily worked out for them, and they've been without Antonio the entire season for the most part. I don't necessarily know when they're getting him back, but with Cornet can help them maybe stay the tide a little bit. They're also without Lucas Paqueta, who has been one of the standout players for a non Big Six side. as far as midfielders, creators, just all around. He's been really good. Dual winning monster. He's got a great eye for a pass, whether it's through a through ball or going long. And with West Ham fans are going to have another reason to be excited because while it's negative that they're missing uh, Edson Alvarez, the Mexican kind of CDM, central defensive midfielder that basically was the Declan Rice replacement, and he's been a lot better than I think people were expecting to be. It looks like they finally got some depth for him because the games that he's missed, we've noticed this. There's been a trend in the league. The games that he has missed, West Ham have looked entirely different. They tried Ward Prowse and Thomas Suchek to kind of be a little bit of that, kind of midfield cover. It wasn't good enough, and Sheffield had like 14 shots. Uh, I think 14 shots like really early on into the second half. I think they made like a 50th minute. I think uh, they ended maybe with only 21, so not a ton in the second half. West Ham finally made a little switch. They were trying to do Danny Ings and Bowen together, and basically Danny Ings is really a striker. He's not really a midfield, so oftentimes he would leave that space, maybe make a run. Maybe West Ham would turn the ball over, and then there'd be a lot of space for Sheffield to attack instead, and that was happening a lot. So we actually saw Moyes take off. I think it was Cornet. He brought on is it Ben Johnson? He brought on like who's usually a fullback, but he kept Emerson on and basically played Ben Johnson in midfield and basically made a midfield three, and that kind of stayed the tide a little bit. As you see, Sheffield was still able to tie this game, but for reasons that were opposite of that. So, so mentioned the Maxwell Cornet goal, and then I think it was 1-1 at halftime because Sheffield had a pretty good debut themselves. They made a signing of Ben Bretton Diaz, a guy that I hadn't really heard about. Apparently, he was in Villarreal. He hadn't necessarily scored in Villarreal, but the season before when he was in the championship, he scored a number of goals, and he's only 21, 24 years old. And this was a good debut goal, and he had a couple of chances when he maybe could have added more to this. He was making some pretty good runs, and Sheffield were doing well to find him. And then Ward Prowse was able to. Danny Ings did have a good game. I mentioned how maybe he was leaving them a little bit vulnerable defensively. Danny Ings did have a good game. He helped kind of create that Maxwell Cornet goal, and then he basically draws the PK, and then Ward Prowse finishes the PK. And at 1-2, you figured maybe West Ham were going to win. And then in like the 90th minute, Sheffield have Wayne Brewster go in for a challenge. It's a really bad challenge, I think, on Emerson. And it's an immediate red card. And so Sheffield are down a goal and down a man. And then out of nowhere, Vladimir Sufal kind of picks up two yellows himself. Uh, I think he first gets a yellow for being upset at Ryan Brewster not being sent off immediately. So I think the first one's for dissent, and then the second one he does a stupid foul. I think on James McAtee. But the negative here is I think it's Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson is on the ball, and he's not really a midfielder, and he's in the middle of the field, and he doesn't recognize to just boot it away or do something, and he tries to basically go past someone, and he loses the ball, and you can't lose the ball in the middle of the field. And Sufal, I guess, takes one for the team. Maybe he doesn't think it's going to be another yellow, but it is. And this happened in like the 96th minute. And so basically the ref added on extra time that maybe he shouldn't have. And McAtee had a really good cross in like the 103rd minute. And Ollie McBurnley and the keeper are basically going for it with each other. And the keeper, I guess, fouls McBurnley. I don't necessarily agree that this was even a foul, but it's awarded as such. And McBurnley is able to make the PK to make it 2-2. It's harsh, but I did feel like Sheffield earned something in this game. Now, I haven't spoken about them for a little bit. They came in, they promoted Chris Wilder. I mean, this is a team that was beaten 8-0 by Newcastle not that long ago. I think in October. They seem significantly harder, more structured. They have an idea of how they're playing. They gave Liverpool a pretty good game. I think early December. I don't necessarily know if this is going to be enough for them to stay up because they're last in I think goals scored and they're up there for goals conceded. But they seem to have a bit more of an identity, and they at least in this game it seemed they made a pretty good signing with Bretton Diaz. So that's kind of setting up the game with West Ham. Another thing too that so they're missing. Let's see, they're missing a couple of their center backs. So Mavropanos had to play, so it was Mavropanos and Zuma, and then Vladimir Sufal and Emerson, kind of the back line. And then it was James Ward-Prowse and Suchek with Ings a little bit ahead of them, and then with Cornet, Bowen, and Fornals. Fornals isn't necessarily kind of a winger either. He's been shown a little bit of the back foot too, but he's quite good on the ball, and I think it's his pass. He has a really good pass that finds Danny Ings that basically creates that PK in the second half. But as you look, there's no Edson Alvarez, and he is a big miss, and there's no Kudus, and no no Paquetá, no Agard. Agard is away to Afcon, and no Antonio. So this isn't necessarily the strongest West Ham team. And you look at that, and this team started the game at I think sixth or seventh position, and just it is quite remarkable of the job that Moyes has done. I don't think that can be said enough. And then with West Ham, it looked like we saw something different. We saw back we almost saw a 4-3-3. So it's Bogle, Amadamanovic, Robinson, and Trusty. Trusty was almost like a fullback, and then it was Hammer, Souza, and Brooks. So Brooks is he was a guy that wasn't really playing. I don't necessarily know if it was for injury or not, but he wasn't playing with the former manager Hickenbottom. Vinny Sousa wasn't playing either, and to me, he's quietly a gem as far as kind of a defensive minded, decent with his feet kind of player. If Sheffield do go down, I think someone will look at Vinny Sousa because he's starting to show himself to be pretty good. And then McAtee, Breton Diaz, and then Usula. James McAtee has a lot of Phil Foden in him, and you see just and I don't necessarily mean that to be like, negative at all. It's a compliment. And yes, there part of it is because both are basically City products. But the way you see him get the ball, turn in space, he's not necessarily the quickest, but he's quite good in tight spaces, and he's good at just kind of threading in really good passes. He has a pass in the second half that finds Brendan Diaz. Diaz is 1v1 with the keeper, and he's not able to uh, get the shot on goal. But it's just McAtee is quite a good player. You don't really know what his best position is. You don't necessarily know if his body is built long term for the league. But at least in this kind of a in this kind of a setup, he's getting a lot of experience that maybe he wouldn't have if he had stayed at City, and so that's pretty good. And again, this is a Sheffield side that really took it to West Ham in that first, let's say, 50-ish minutes or so, because they had shots for days. I think they had 15 or 16, maybe it was 14 registered just in 50 minutes, and that's just not something that you remember. One, you don't remember really a Chris Wilder side doing, or just Sheffield in general, because they're a team that has struggled for goals, struggled for attacks, and so this was all around pretty. I think this was promising, really, for both teams. And David Moyes isn't going to be happy with the draw, drawing Sheffield. But given what they were missing, given that they were able to come back in the game, that's not terrible. Given that they were able to get Cornet going, I think was positive. And given that Danny Ings has gotten a chance to play in the FA Cup games, so I think West Ham were even taken out of the FA Cup, losing to was it Bolt? It wasn't Bolton. It wasn't Preston. Losing to some team. I should know this in the championship or like kind of lower division. So they didn't necessarily have the best go of it for the last couple of games without losing what they've been missing. So because the first game I think was 1-1, so I went to replay and I think they lost the replay. And so that's kind of just setting it all up. We have Sheffield with 2.5 xG, West Ham 2, Sheffield with 21 shots and 6 on target, West Ham with 16 shots and 5. But again, the four big chances for Sheffield and three for West Ham. This was quite a good game. It was end to end. Again, in a way that we don't always see. Sheffield had 57% of the ball, but West Ham liked doing that. But Sheffield had 396 for passing, 80% accuracy. That's not something we were seeing with Heckenbottom either. And again, it's small, but you do see an identity of what they're trying to do. They get the ball, they're trying to find feet. They're not necessarily booting it away just to do it. You see certain runs being made. There's an idea of how they're trying to attack. And someone like Breton Diaz just coming in, it's only one game to go off, but he made some pretty good runs to get in behind that weren't really marked. So this is quite exciting for them. And the West Ham with 273 passing, that's usually that is usually what you see with the Moyes side, and they don't really have their best players on the ball as well. So that some of that can be explained too. But for Sheffield, there are a lot of positives. McAtee, Vinicius, Austin Trusty, an American. I think he former Arsenal product is starting to look pretty good for them. So I like that. I mean, McBurnley having the big PK, and it's kind of funny. He's had a very awkward season for them because he's gotten sent off twice, so he's had to miss a few of these games too. But you just see he's an important player, and he doesn't even start this game. I think it's Osula, but he comes in and he's not just good in the air. When you go long to him, he does a pretty good job to at least contest it and try to win heads. So you can go long to him. Maybe he can knock balls down to maybe people making runs in behind him. So the only negative is they haven't scored enough, and so they've got 9 points. So this may be too little, too late. With 21, or I guess it's 10 points now with 21 games played, and really no side has stayed up, having fewer than I think 15 points around this stretch. So they did a really good job to draw Aston Villa, but unfortunately for them, Cam Archer gets the goal in the 87th minute or so, and then they still draw 1-1, so they weren't able to get the 3 points because of a very late. Uh, I think it's a very late goal, by Aston Villa. I forget who scored it. His name starts with a C, but I forget his name. And then the 3-2 loss to Luton Town, it was really unfortunate too because there was two own goals, and then the 2-0 loss to Man City, they weren't really competitive, but it's just Man City, so that is what it is. So goal scored there at 15 for last, and conceded there at 47, also last. And the top scorer has been McBurnley, and he didn't even start this game. Uh, a positive has been Cam Archer, and we didn't really see Cam Archer till the second half. So it was interesting to see Osula get the start. I do think McAtee has been really good for them. One thing I didn't mention is Sheffield were able to advance in the FA game, and yeah, I think it was a low division side, so it's what you would expect. But it's good to just see a young player like McAtee take a couple of the chances that he scored because that can bring some confidence as well. And he scored some beauties in that game. And I've already spoken up of Vinny Souza and the praise that I have for him. So Sheffield have improved under Wilder. I think it's worth kind of saying that. And it is maybe too much to climb, but at the same time, you can build vibes, and if nothing else, you can set some building blocks in for next year, maybe in the championship. But we'll have to see what they do with Ben Brenton Diaz, 24 years old, Chilean, who apparently already has had success in the championship. So if they do go down, maybe they're well placed with him to immediately come back up. We'll have to see, and then I do think it was interesting to. I think I mentioned it before. They gave away Sanderberg to a promoted rival in Burnley, and it didn't feel like they had necessarily that wasn't necessarily the best idea. I think they tried to replace him with Gustav Hammer. Hammer is an attacking player, but he's not the best defensively. Oh, that's another thing too. Wilder has come in and he's found a way to make Sheffield. He's found a way to play Gosselhammer and McAtee, and they're not necessarily liable, at least defensively. They haven't been nearly as cut open. Uh, so I do think there are some positives here. And then they lost Ndiaye, who is he's doing well. I think he's playing for Senegal in African Cup of Nations. I think I saw him score, and he's having a pretty good season for Marseille in the a Champions League side. So it's not easy to lose a player like that, but they haven't been able to replace him easily. And then with West Ham, Danny Ings, why not? The interesting thing was they played him with Bowen in front of him because Danny Ings isn't necessarily going to make those runs. He kind of likes looking for the ball too. And you had Bowen to kind of play off him. It was looking good offensively, but they were getting cut open. So the change that Moyes made in the second half was he took off Cornet. Maybe first game back or not. Maybe he didn't have the legs. Moved Bowen back to his usual kind of right wing spot and played Danny Ings as the kind of the striker you would expect, and that would allow them to actually shore up the midfield a little bit. So it wasn't at the time. It wasn't really there were a couple of West Ham fans that were actually booing the decision, but it helped them somewhat take back control of the game. But Danny Ings needs to work on needs to work carry on a little bit because it hasn't gone well since he's moved in, and we're a couple years away from it. I think it was maybe even back in the COVID year, but Danny Ings was close to being a Golden Boot winner when he's always had fitness issues, and maybe that's kind of maybe that's finally taken its toll. He's older, so he's lost a little of the pace anyways, and he's had a number of knee issues, long term knee operations, maybe on both legs. But when he's able to, he's got an eye for goal. When he is able to go, he doesn't really have legs to necessarily. He's never really going to beat you in the air, and he doesn't seem like he's going to make those runs in behind. So it's harder to find a way to get the ball to his legs when you don't really have players that are really good at doing that. So at least in this game, one thing that Fornells was able to do. I haven't really spoken to him about much, but the way how they get that PK is Fornells has a really good threaded ball that's able to find Danny Ings' legs when he's trying to post up a little bit in the box. So, and Fornells is a player that hasn't always been playing. So it's not. I don't think it's all negative. Again, I think I picked West Ham to maybe potentially, I didn't say go down, but to struggle. And I think maybe to move on with a new coach. I think I even mentioned Graham Potter. So whether or not this is good, this is sustainable long term. Maybe eventually West Ham do kind of take a drop. Having the misses with Paqueta shows up. But that said, we don't necessarily know how long he's supposed to be out, and eventually they are going to get Antonia back. So maybe Kudos can play on the opposite wing too. Maybe he can play on the left side, and you can allow Bowen to play on his favorite right side. We'll have to see how that works out. And it does seem like they have brought in Calvin Phillips to the club on loan, and I like this. I've the reaction online has been interesting to me. People have seen or have been saying that he's a flop. He hasn't worked out at Man City. He hasn't even gotten a game really. Why do you think he can play now? Maybe his legs are gone. Maybe he's toast. Sometimes that can happen with Beasley players. They get burnt out. If nothing else, it gives you extra CDM cover. For the most part, Moyes' teams don't really run a lot. They basically they sit behind the ball a ton and they try to play off the counter. And one thing you can say Paqueta does this too. One thing you can say with Calvin Phillips is he's got a really good long ball on him. He's got a great delivery. When he was with Leeds, he had one of the best passing ranges in the league. And so you imagine Bowen, Antonio, or Kudus, making those runs in behind, especially Antonio. If you get Antonio back, that long ball over the top, he has such good weight on it. He's going to be able to pick Antonio. Antonio will be able to collect it, and he'll be able to do what he does. He normally is quite good at winning a duel and keeping the ball and kind of helping get everyone else to get up the field a little bit more. So I don't hate the move, to be honest. And they need obviously you need it, whether or not the idea is to play both him and Edson Alvarez together. I don't necessarily know, or maybe it's just cover when you're losing Alvarez. If nothing else, you needed cover for that too because West Ham are still alive in Europa, and this maybe helps them with the Europa. It's important to keep that in mind too. And then I'll move on to Liverpool and Bournemouth, who win 4-0. This did not feel like a 4-0 game, though. I mean, the first goal came in the 52nd minute with Darwin Núñez, and then Diego Jota with two, and then Darwin Núñez with the fourth one, I think, in like the 89th minute or so. But coming in, I mean, this was Bournemouth, one of the best sides in the league since November. Solanke, a former player that I think it was at the club when Klopp was there. So I mean, he scored versus them last year in March. Bournemouth beat Liverpool last season in March. I think Salah missed a PK in that game, and it was scoreless going into halftime. And really, if anything, there wasn't a whole lot of offensive production. I thought Gomez and Bradley. This was maybe a game where they were struggling a little bit, at least offensively. They were good defensively, and I thought the front three were struggling. There wasn't really a whole lot of connection there. I thought Harvey Elliott was struggling a little bit in midfield. He was getting bullied a little bit, and Bournemouth maybe they didn't really make Allison work per se, but they were doing a good job to make Kanate and Virgil van Dijk work. Where whether or not they were getting like big blocks, maybe they were able to get a couple of balls flash across the goal where no one was really at the end of it, but it was a dangerous ball. And Bournemouth were making a lot of dangerous moments, at least in that first half. And so I think even Klopp mentioned it, where he basically was asked at the end of the game, his thoughts on the first half were just like, It's good that it's scoreless." That basically is the positive news because it could have been a lot worse. The Liverpool did not play well in that first half, and Bournemouth. You saw why they are in such good run of form, and they were without Antoine and Semenyo. They're basically their second best attacker. They were without a couple of their favorite fullbacks. So we saw Hill get a debut, and we saw Chris Mepam having to play because Marcos Senese was suspended. So it's not their first choice back line. Max Aarons played instead of Adam Smith, and it was interesting to see Christie and Cook, and then Clivert, not necessarily Philip Billing, and then Tavernier and Sinisterra with Solanke because again Semenyo was not available, and they have a couple of guys that are out injured. So we had to see when it came to their bench, they only had someone like a David Brooks to come on. They didn't necessarily have a lot of they didn't have Django Wadatar available, so they were little short, at least squad depth wise, and I think that showed up a little bit in the second half. But Bournemouth were doing good. They were pressing. They were trying to get Liverpool to turn the ball over, and for the most part, Liverpool's front three was not really able to stick. They didn't have a lot of really good connection. There wasn't a whole lot to talk about in the first half. So Klopp went with Jota in the middle, Nunez on the one side, Diaz on the right side, a bit like we saw that worked versus Arsenal, at least without Jota. And the change was basically he moved Jota to almost be on the right side, Diaz back to left, and Nunez through the middle. And I don't necessarily know if the idea was to basically just allow Darwin Nunes to kind of do some bully ball, but that pretty much happened. And another thing that's worth noting is uh, there are a couple of games without Endo now, and this was a game without Trent Alexander Arnold, who's usually their kind of controller. And so, how are they going to survive in games like this where maybe the space isn't really there? The weather was also horrendous too. That played a role in this too. Uh, just lots of it's not just the rain, just lots of wind. So any kind of any kind of long ball over the top, it would be hard to control it a little bit. So this was a game to be really good at playing stuff on the feet and controlling it. And someone like Alexis McAllister was a gem at this, and maybe he can get got at a little bit defensively. But in this game, he was superb. I think it was like 12 or 16 for ground duels. He had something like 15 ground recoveries, which is unreal. So he did the defensive work. He was getting the turnovers, and I think he created four chances, four key passes. He was amazing in this game, as was Kanate and Virgil van Dijk. And one thing that I'm going to get to later on is one of the main changes that we've seen is in the beginning of the season, we saw Klopp trying to experiment a little bit with that kind of back three. Weirdly enough, he was shifting over like he was making Andy Robertson basically having to play as like a third center back because he didn't feel like maybe Virgil van Dijk and Kanate could basically play in a back two together. And we've seen that completely change. And basically, Kanate and Virgil van Dijk are playing basically at the touchline, basically playing at the midway line the entire game, and you're allowing Gomez by being able to do that. You're allowing Gomez to able to maybe shift a little bit inside, which is to maybe be a number in midfield, and you're allowing Bradley to basically just own the wing, entirely. And so it basically it allows you to now you can be maybe got at a little bit defensively, but Kanate is so if the ball is over the top, Kanate is really good at being able to run down the wing and close that off. And Virgil van Dijk is showing he can do that too. And they're also doing basically they're allowing themselves to be 1v1 or maybe it's 1v2 with attackers that are trying to basically, run in behind them from about the halfway line. But what it really does is they're basically extra protection. So the front line of defense, or I guess the last line of defense, really is at the midway line. And when there's kind of a loose ball 50-50, you're seeing Kanate and Virgil van Dijk be next to McAllister. And that's creating some trouble for teams too. So Liverpool in the second half really took over the game because of that, because of how physical and how aggressive the center backs were at challenging for the ball. They don't allow passes to they don't allow team to basically pass the ball and basically get on it and turn with it with space in front of them. They like having someone directly on the shoulder when that pass is coming in because it's harder to control, and that's usually how you can get a turnover. And so that's kind of setting up a little bit how the game went. The only thing to talk about in the first half was Clivert basically went in for a challenge that was high on Luis Diaz, and it was really high. The studs were showing, and it wasn't even a foul. And I was just like, in my day, I remember Curtis Jones being sent off for something far less serious than this, and that was only I don't know 3 months ago versus Tottenham. So there was a little gripe about that. Diaz didn't necessarily have his best game, but this happened in the first half, and I think it was just really good that Diaz was able to, Diaz just wasn't able to have the impact that he had for Arsenal. But it's just really good, in my opinion, that he was able to walk and still play because he could have and avoid a serious injury because this could have been really rough. So it's possible maybe that's the reason why he wasn't necessarily having as good of an impact too. I mean, it was studs up. It was hard. He could have been suffering a little bit dealing with that. With the wind and rain too. That's not necessarily great if you're dealing with an injury and, at least it wasn't that bad because he was able to play yesterday and score the key goal that allowed Liverpool to have that two-goal lead versus Fulham, where they were able to advance in the FA Cup. And so the halftime was kind of that. It was quite competitive. It didn't feel like it was going to be a 4-0 kind of game. And we do get the first goal with Darwin Núñez, and this starts with a hopeful ball by Konate. He's not really trying to do this, but then it finds Curtis Jones, who chests it down with some pretty good control. And then Jones quickly plays the ball to Jota, making a run into the box. And then Jota first times it into Darwin Núñez, who's making a central run into the box, basically splitting the two Bournemouth center backs. And then Núñez first times it past the keeper Neto. And I love the quick thinking and passing here. No thoughts about hesitating, taking extra touches, just one touch and go. And it's a great finish by Núñez, who's needed to score something like this. But it's also just really good unselfish play by Jota, who just sets Núñez up, and because Jota's been playing on the right side here, it's also really good play by Curtis Jones. Curtis Jones having that collection to chest it down, and then Curtis Jones has his head up and is able to play the right pass to Jota. So be able to do this really quickly, you're able to get Bournemouth a little bit in a transition, and they scored, and it was a good goal. And then they get the second one, and the second one is even better because basically there's a long ball to Solanke. Virgil van Dijk is able to run down and beat Solanke to a 50-50 ball down the wing, and then Van Dijk's able to actually turn around Solanke and is able to basically pass it up upfield and keep the ball in bounds. And basically, he's not really trying to pick out anyone. He's just kind of booted away. But Liverpool are able to win this ball back. So Gravenberch has since come on for Elliot. Gravenberch has a little. I don't want to say a little taller. I think he's like 6'3". Elliot is maybe like 5'7". Gravenberch and Jota basically do well to just keep the ball alive. And what happens here after there's a couple contested headers and flicks, and Jota then is basically able to loop a ball upfield to Darwin Núñez to contest, and basically he just dunks on Christopher Mepham. And from there, Gakpo then runs on to a loose ball. Gakpo has since come on for someone as well, and I think it's for Luis Diaz. And then he sees Jota making a run into the box on the right side. Gakpo plays Jota in, and then Jota just has a ridiculous finish to slide and curl this in around Neto, beating him near post. He gets a lot of power on this, and this was real time. I was like, how did the keeper be beat near post by that? On the other angle, this is just an insane goal by Jota, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying, like. uh, without Salah, someone needs to step up and basically step up with the goals because Salah has been responsible for creating everything this season. Darwin Núñez has gotten he's been on the end of creating something too. I think he's 10 for 10. He's got 10 goals and 10 assists for all competitions so far. But he's also been missing some chances. Luis Diaz has been missing chances. Gakpo as well. There's been a need for someone else to contribute when it comes to just finishing chances. And this was only a half chance, in my opinion. It's not really because Jota goes near post. It's not a high xG as they would say, and it's a lovely finish. And again, the best front three without Salah is possibly this. Maybe Gakpo on the wing, Nunez. I like seeing Gakpo and Nunez play together. I think both players basically play together when both are on the field, and then just Jota to kind of finish some chances. Uh, and you still don't. The only thing is you still don't really have an idea of who to really play who to fit on that right wing. Maybe it is Jota. Uh, we saw yesterday, Jota wasn't able to play until he came on the bench. And I think he actually played through the middle when he came on. I don't necessarily know if him playing on the middle is his best role because he doesn't really have the best hold up play. Uh, but he is just he is just a terror when he gets the ball into the box. He's able to create some chances. He's just really clever with his movement. He can dribble, and he's got a shot on him that just always, usually or more often than not, he gets power on it, and he's able to put it on goal where he forces a keeper to make a save. Uh, in many respects, he is Jurgen Klopp's Sergio Aguero, and that is maybe it's maybe going a little overboard because Sergio Aguero, I think, is like number 3 for all time for goals in the Premier League with like 220. Jota hasn't had many seasons. He hasn't really been healthy for a lot of this stretch, but as far as game goals per minute, he's already up there with Holland. He's like top 3 in the league. If Jota could just be a consistent stay in the team, I do think you could see him getting basically 20 goals a season. Um, because I don't really see Liverpool create so much, and he is just really good at getting on the end and just he finishes every single game essentially. And usually he'll even have games where if you're following like a sofa score or kind of a foot mob kind of app, you'll see him in like the orange or like the yellow and for 85 minutes or so, and then he'll just create one chance out of nothing, whether it's a dribble, maybe it's getting on the end of a shot, and he just scores. He does it every single game. He's the funniest player in the world, and he's just really really good. And then this one we get for the third, and here McAllister helps win the ball back to all know Ryan Christie, and a ball is played to find Kanate, who immediately passes upfield to a teammate. I think it's Gravenberch who does well to shift the ball, and then he evades a Bournemouth player, and then Gravenberch makes the right pass to find Gakpo wide open in the center of the field, and then Gakpo is being closed down on, and he makes a really good forward ball to Darwin Núñez to chase, and Núñez wins the race. And then Nunez basically does well to hold on to the ball, waits for teammates, and he tries to cross it in, and the cross isn't great. It doesn't go into anyone, but it doesn't go out of bounds. Connor Bradley is right there, and he's able to run onto it, and then he sees Jota in the box, and he passes it to Jota, just completely wide open. Jota's done well to avoid any kind of defenders marking him, and he's open. And Jota tries to volley this, and it's hard, and he whiffs, and the crowd even laughs, but he's able to quickly stick with the ball, and basically he's able to stick with it. He takes a touch, and then the second one he's able to slide in before basically the defender's able to clear it, and he's able to find the corner of the net. So again, it's just this is just he is the funniest player I think in the league, maybe in the world, because he just does things that just make you question how did this happen, and he does it every single game he plays in. And then Darwin Núñez is able to get his second in the 88th minute. Game's basically over, and by this point, Klopp's brought on Owen Beck, a young guy, to play at left back, and that allows Joe Gomez to play at right back. And Beck basically tries to dribble, but he gets into trouble, but he's able to win the ball back, and then Gakpo finds McAllister, and then McAllister does a really good job to switch the ball to Gomez, and then Gomez has a Trent Alexander-Arnold like ball that picks out Darwin Núñez from 35 yards away, and it's lifted with the right height, perfect delivery, and Nunez is able to get the touch to basically get it to creep into the far corner, and that's good. I think Darwin Nunez has needed a game like this, and I was wondering maybe this kind of spur him on a little bit. He had a couple chances to score yesterday, and really just unlucky. He had a couple really good finishes, but at the same time, is similar to the goal here, and similar to the first goal. He takes things really really early and quickly. Sometimes it'll come off, but he's not really calm. You're not seeing that. So sometimes he'll score the worldie or two. Other times he's still not really composed, unfortunately. But he offers you so much else, so you have to just kind of stomach with it. But that's okay when you have someone like Jota that can finish the chances instead. So Liverpool got lucky in this game. I'm not going to lie. Had this been a 0-0 or maybe a 1-0 kind of game, I could have seen it going either way because the four shots that beat Bournemouth weren't really high quality chances. Two big chances apiece. The XG was 1.3 to Bournemouth, 1.5 to Liverpool. 12 shots and 5 for Bournemouth, and then 14 and 7 for Liverpool. Bournemouth with 39% possession, Liverpool 61. That's kind of the case in every game they play in. And then Bournemouth 235, 72% passing. Liverpool with 439, 83%. And so get started with Liverpool. Given what they were missing, Bournemouth been a really good side. This was I don't necessarily say a must because of the way that City are playing, but this was one of those games that can make you start to believe a little bit. Uh, because of who they're missing, and this is the type of game that I do think in the past Klopp would have dropped a little bit. Maybe they would have gotten a draw, essentially. And without Jota, I think it would have been a draw. You need someone to finish chances. People can talk about tactics all they want. Eventually, you need someone to be able to put their laces through a football to get it past the keeper. Essentially, not to simplify it essentially, but yeah, that is it. But so they're without Trent Alexander-Arnold, they're without Thiago. Last year, in this case, it would have been someone like a Henderson or a Fabinho, and here he's not really known as kind of a defensive midfielder, but Klopp is playing McAllister as a lone six, and really he's a controller. And I have in my notes he's a composer, and so he makes the rest of the band work. And the way he's just you can press him, and he's really good at getting the ball and turning. He did some defensive work here, but it's funny because the way that he's able to play either advanced, he was kind of an attacking midfielder last year for Brighton, and we thought it was Casado that was doing the defensive work. Maybe there were a couple of times in the second half of last season where De Zerbi was playing Casado as a right back, like an inverted right back, and right back would still be in midfield at times, but for the most part, there would be times when Alexis McAllister was in midfield by himself, and those are the games Brighton was still doing well in, still winning. And so here you see what he's able to do. So we have 63 passes, 88% accuracy, 100 touches, 4 key passes, 12 of 8 ground duels, and 15 recoveries. So he did the defensive work, and he's just really good at he just reads the game. He's just clever. He's able to, if someone's open, he's able to thread in the pass to get him open. He can score. He scored a worldie versus Fulham, and I mean the thought I had even last season was I was flabbergasted even then. I think I even said it to Rex that I thought Alexis McAllister was the most ideal Gundogan replacement I imaginable. If you could like just fantasize someone that would be just ideal to basically be what Gundogan is as a player, it's almost like it's him. And it was weird how City didn't try to go for him. Uh, yeah, I'm trying to think of McAllister and Rodri in kind of a midfield three as opposed to Kovacic. That would be terrifying. So it's a good thing that City weren't able to get him, and Liverpool are enjoying him. A couple of times when I've felt maybe this isn't really his best position, that Klopp's even tried to play Indo instead when Alexis McAllister was available, and tried to play McAllister actually further ahead. And that's another thing too. This isn't really his best position, or you think his preferred position. You'd like to maybe him be a little further forward. And if they are able to get Thiago back, do they maybe try to interchange and mix it up a little bit? We'll have to see. But there, uh, there was a time last season when, if say Trent Alexander-Arnold wasn't able to play, maybe a Robertson wasn't able to play, and no Thiago. Liverpool in these kind of games would have had 300 passes. It would have been a lot of long balls to no one, especially in a rainy game like this. They wouldn't have no Slobosly as well. You would not have been able to see this team play like this. And they've done a pretty good job to lose, I say, a Henderson and Fabinho, and to even the young guy that came in, Bradley. He was doing a good job to at least find feet, and, pass and move, and they were able to keep the ball on the ground and collect it and keep it. Versus a pretty good Bournemouth side that are good at pressing and getting turnovers themselves. So this was a not insignificant win by any stretch, uh, and helped on with Jota being basically Klopp's Aguero, like I mentioned. Darwin Núñez, the runs and work rate. I think it's improved his link of play, and it seems he can play on any side of the field. I'd like to maybe even see him on the right. Uh, and he just seems to be a nightmare for defenders. I mean, they get the second goal by him basically dunking on Chris Mepham. And then the Kanate and Van Dijk pairing, I'm going to get into that a little bit. And then with the engine room, Curtis Jones and Slabashly. There's some kind of record when both play. Liverpool have been like their absolute best when that's been kind of the midfield. At least that's been two in the midfield three. They've been without Slobosly, but Curtis Jones has been that engine room as well. And there were a couple of games early in the season when Jones wasn't able to play. Maybe he was either injured or maybe even suspended. Those were the games when actually teams were able to somewhat get a run a little bit at Liverpool's back line. With Jones, you've got that engine room again, and basically, I guess quickly going to the negatives. Mo Salah has a hamstring issue, and so his African Cup Nations was cut short, and it looks like he's going to miss at least maybe they said 28 days. So a month. Maybe three to four games. That probably he won't be able to make the Caribou final. I think that's the end of February. If he's able to recover in time, there apparently, if Egypt is still alive, able to survive, they are trying to target the African Cup of Nations final if Egypt can make it. But at the same time, this was the fear. I saw a chart sometime a week ago where basically it had the players that had logged the most minutes for all the clubs, and really it was just Liverpool, Man City, and Arsenal players. Uh, Funny enough, and Declan Rice was up there, and apparently he got a hamstring. He had a hamstring tightness in this past game for Crystal Palace, which I'm about to get to. Mo Salah was up there, and Trent Alexander-Arnold was up there, and I thought that was Kyle Walker was actually number one, which was surprising. But they have played a lot of minutes, and Salah, for being as good physically as he is, apparently he's an amazing dietitian. He's great at training. Eventually, the minutes do catch up, and so this was the kind of the fear that eventually, either his legs were going to be tired and heavy, or this was going to happen. Now, they got lucky in 2022 when both Salah and Mane were able to play the entire tournament. Come back. Mane actually had an amazing second half of the season, and they were able to almost beat City to a title. Salah came back and he wasn't really hurt, but he wasn't the same player. His legs were definitely drained, and so there's always been that kind of fear. And so without Salah, it's not it is not the same team, to say the least. So they're having offensive balance issues on the right wing. We've seen that for a number of these games, and so that's kind of starting to be because I think the other idea was to try Sloboshy, maybe further forward, and he's had a hamstring issue as well. And so there's no Trent. Robinson's missed the entire I don't know. They said 12 games or so. He hasn't played since October. No Endo, no Tiago. This was a game that again I think in the past they probably would have lost. And the one positive is it looks like they might get Robinson back soon. So maybe you can finally move Gomez even to his more traditional kind of right back spot if Trent Alexander-Arnold can't go. I'd like to maybe just see that in general. I'd like to see Trent basically played in midfield more. So and frankly, not enough can be said about the job that Tsimikas had done before he got hurt. It's important to not forget about him because he was doing a really good job before he got hurt versus Arsenal. And then Gomez has come in and been a rock defensively at left back, and no one really knew how this was going to work because he doesn't really have a left foot. But he defensively he's been really really good, and so he's basically become like basically Klopp's James Milner. He can play right back or left back, and I think he is a center back replacement as well. So kudos to he's arguably been a player of the year candidate for them just because he's been able to help them not necessarily have to completely throw up the blueprint or the game plans essentially. And so, one thing I want to end with before kind of moving on to I think Arsenal and Palace is you hear the word Liverpool 2.0, and really what is that? And what I wrote down is basically it's not much different than what the old Liverpool was, but it starts with the engine room, the midfield engine room, being able to run and press and being able to track runners if that's needed, but being good with the ball where you can just you can feed the ball to attackers. So that's important. Two, you need a back line that can defend big spaces, either behind you or out wide. So you need to be able to stop transition attacks, but also defend spaces out wide in a high line. You have to be able to play a high line to play like this. And so that's where Kanate and Van Dijk and Quanta that we saw yesterday, Gojo Gomez can do as well. That is really the coup de grace. That is the important thing. Not a lot of teams can play this way, and that's the reason why it feels like Liverpool are able to just dominate possession in most games, other than like Man City, because of this. They have everyone that's really high up with the and center backs 6'4" and tall and physical. You're able to. It always feels like they have they are able to outnumber people where the ball is. Essentially, they're able to help win it back. You also need a goalkeeper that can stop the odd 1v1 against him, which they have in Allison. I think arguably he's the best in the world at that. But two, you need to have attackers that can work without the ball. Be the front line for the first line of defense without the ball. And that's what you have with the front three. That's why Klopp likes playing a 4-3-3, because he thinks either if a team whether has a back five, a back three, no matter what, he thinks you can press with three and at least create chances where you can manipulate the ball to go where you want it to go. Um, but also you need to be able to make runs in behind. So you need to have some pace to you and finish those chances. That's where Jota comes in. And then everything is about being comfortable with the ball at your feet while being pressed. And is the versatility is the biggest change in this side than from earlier ones. Uh, and 18 and 21, everyone was static and rigid, and it was almost like a puzzle or a square peg in a square hole, essentially. And if you put someone out, say Van Dijk got injured, and you had to put someone else in that spot, you saw the entire team suffer from that. Or if, say, Amane wasn't able to go, or Firmino was missing games, if they had to play without Gini Wijnaldum, when you put in like a Milner, the everything it was very reliant. That whole team was structured on everyone being fit and able to go. Here, you're able to see a lot more versatility. You can play. You've seen Klopp playing Slabashai either on the left or right side. You've seen Gomez do the same thing. You're seeing Salah sometimes play through the middle. You're seeing Diaz play on the right side or the left side. You're seeing Nunez play in through the middle or the left side. Jota likewise. You're seeing Trent basically play any position on the field. You're seeing Kanate having to defend out wide as well, and you're seeing Elliott either can play forward. I don't really love him forward, but you're seeing him trying to play in a different. You've seen Elliott and Sloboshai almost play in a pivot in versus Newcastle. So not everyone is as static and rigid as they were in the past. Gakpo doesn't really have a position, but it seems when he plays, he just needs to be on the field. He's good no matter what. Uh, you're seeing a lot of that, and so that has been an important key that's allowed them to have some misses this season, where maybe in the past they would have lost some games, and they've only lost to Spurs this whole season, and that was kind of controversial in how they lost that. And then two, Klopp's second half changes have he's been getting it right more often than not in a way that I can't remember, and I think I've spoken about that. And so uh, another good example of that would be in this game. He brought on Gakpo and brought on Gravenberch, and both impacted the game positively. And I have been wondering, does Gravenberch maybe work better on the right side than on the left? But yeah, and maybe it requires more defensive work. But it just seems sometimes when Gravenberch has been played with Slabashai, that hasn't been quite a good pairing. Here, Gravenberch played on the right, allowed with Curtis Jones to kind of do the defensive work. I think looks a little bit better. Gravenberch seems to like being on the ball and he likes basically leading counters or transitions, and he seems to be quite good at that. And we saw him yesterday versus Fulham. His legs are so long; he's able to basically win the ball back off a lot of people, and Liverpool were able to start a lot of counters that way. And then the other change in this game was shifting Jota from the middle to the right side. And then we saw yesterday. Yesterday was maybe the first time where I thought Klopp maybe got it wrong, and thankfully I ate my words because what he did is he took off Nunez, he took off Alexis McAllister when Liverpool had the 2-goal lead, thinking that was gonna be enough, and instead Fulham got a goal to get back into the game to make it only a 1-goal lead to get it to extra time, and instead, what happened? Because basically by taking McAllister off, you lost the ability to control the game, and then with Nunez, you lost the ability to scare a back line. You always have that threat over the top, so that allowed Fulham to play a little higher up, and they were able to press a little bit better, and Liverpool lost all control in that second half. And then Klopp did something that I was trying to think. I can't remember him ever doing. And what he did is he brought Kanate on, and I forget who he took off, but basically he took off an attacker, and basically he went to a back five with it was like Gomez, Kanate, Virgil Van Dijk, Kwanzaa, and then I think it was like Connor Bradley. And what he did was, I mean, Gomez is basically a center back as well, and basically he went to almost a 5-4-1, and they to see the game out the final 10 minutes, and Fulham weren't able to even get a shot. before this, Kelleher was starting to get a lot of looks at his goal, and this kind of because for the I was trying to think in that 2022 season, or even before that, I remembered there would be a number of games when Liverpool would have a 2-goal lead, and for some reason, they weren't able to keep it. They were actually lost a lot of games when they were up, they have a 2-goal lead, and then all of a sudden, the other team would be back in it, and maybe they'd end with a draw. Here, they found he's found a way to help them when they have a 1-goal lead, they usually see it out again, and that was kind of the secret to their 2021, their 1920 season when they were able to win the title because for as good as that team was, they didn't really blow teams away. In fact, a lot of those games, maybe you guys forget, Liverpool would be like a 1-0 game, maybe it would be 1-1, maybe, yeah, and Liverpool were somewhat from around, like, the 75th minute on, Liverpool were able to basically win from that point on in basically every single game that season, and oftentimes, it was only a 1-0 kind of win or 1 goal kind of win, and they found a way to somewhat get back to that, and, that's been important too, and then with Bournemouth, it's not, I don't really think it's much to emphasize, because, I think the scoreline is harsh. First half was very cagey, they did well there, um, and they were beaten by 3 quality finish. I can't really go at them a ton, and, the best thing you can say about Bournemouth is I don't think anyone has them as picked to struggle now, and I did a podcast with, my buddy Jeremy, I think early November, maybe late October. I was wondering if their coach would be the first one to actually, get sacked and shown the door, and, it's a good thing that they stuck with Areola, uh, because, did he, really turn things around. I mean, they're missing a lot of guys. They weren't at full strength. Recently beat Man United, drew Aston Villa 2-2. They're a good side, and, you, 'cause right after that podcast, they played Man City, I think they lost, like, 6-0, and I almost wanted to double down, on that take, and just since that game, they have really woken up, and good for them. Good for them to basically good for their boardroom to have the vision to pick him out. He did some great things with Rayo Vallecano, and apparently he did a lot of that with a very restricted budget. And he was very good at not only getting Vallecano to make a couple cup runs, but apparently they were quite competitive versus the big clubs, versus the Barcelonas, versus the Atleticos, Real Madrids, etc. So, I mean, they had a good manager in Gary O'Neill, and we're seeing that with Wolves. Well, he's doing a good job with Wolves, but maybe they just thought to maybe go a little bit forward. Maybe someone with a different vision was needed, and it took a while for them to get going. I remember them praising a little bit how good they were at pressing ball, but for the most part, it felt like they would run out of steam a little bit in the second half. He's found a way to somewhat fix that. This game not included. So great to see and good for them. And then with Arsenal and Crystal Palace, I don't really have to spend a ton of time talking about the goals, funny enough, because the Arsenal scored 5. It was really only 3. 2 of them were from a corner kick, and the third one came from a Palace corner kick that Arsenal were able to get the counter on. Really good counter. I'll spend the time talking about that. And then they got 2 goals with Martinelli really late in like the 90th minute. So this game wasn't what the score said. It wasn't a 5-0 kind of game. But that said, this is what Arsenal maybe needed. So that's good. And with Crystal Palace, they went into this game without Elise, and it looks like he has another hamstring injury. Jordan Ayew is apparently away to African Cup of Nations. Grant Potter was in the stands, which I thought was interesting. And going into this game, there was talks of Hodgson being on the hot seat. You understand it. Palace have looked a different team though when Eze and Elise have been able to play together. And the problem for them is that hasn't been the case a lot this season. Elise got hurt, I think in the summertime for a U21 or U for an under 20 French side in Euros. And France are even the favorite. And he messed up his ankle in that game, and he wasn't really able to go until maybe October. And then the first game back, he scored a worldie versus Luton Town. But Eze and I think Eze actually got hurt in that game. So they haven't had more than a couple games together, but we saw what they looked like versus Brentford, and they look an entirely different team. But here, they're missing Decore, who I think he's lost for the whole season. They've had to shift Chris Richards over. It's worked somewhat, at least defensively, but Chris Richards isn't necessarily the best on the ball, at least for that. But he's learning a whole new position as he plays, and in this game, he wasn't even asked to play that position. They went to a back five essentially, where he was back to being another third center back, and unfortunately, he got dunked on for the one of the goals. But I think the problem with Hodgson is when they haven't had a couple of their players. I mean, Ayu is an important attacker for them. They've looked pedestrian, and I think Hodgson will keep them up. I mean, this is my kind of take too. I think Hodgson will keep them up, but at the same time, what is their ambition other than that? And I know a lot of teams are probably going to come for Eze and Elise in the summer. I know Liverpool were trying to go for Decore, but the price point kind of put them off. But it does seem like if the fans do want a little bit more ambition and do want to go in a different direction, if you're starting from scratch in the summer, now Hodgson also is 76, 77 years old. It doesn't really make sense to keep him anyways. It does make sense to bring in someone like a Graham Potter in the summertime. Now the thinking could be to do it now, but and Graham Potter when he came to Brighton was did have a couple of those seasons when his league form, or at least his XG, so that they should have been like in the top 8, top 6 side in the league when they were finishing like 16th every single season. It doesn't always go great. That would be some kind of change, and I think Hodgson will, if he stays, will keep them up. I think Palace have enough to stay up. If you switch Graham Potter in, I don't necessarily think they would go down, but I do think it would take some time to get those players used to playing an entirely different style. So I don't necessarily know if it makes sense to do it now, but it was interesting to see him in the stands, and uh, I think I mentioned in my first episode, I could see Graham Potter coming back to the league. I think I said in Christmas time. I mentioned West Ham, so I mentioned a different London club. That's also looked like a terrible prediction because of the way that Moyes has looked. But this makes sense, and it would be quite exciting for Palace fans to have someone like him because of the type of football he would bring. It's not going to be the situation that he had at Chelsea. He's not going to be managing diva millionaires that want to play a certain style. Maybe they don't want to work necessarily that the same kind of way. Maybe they didn't respect him, or whatever it was at Chelsea that didn't make it work. It would make sense for him to come in and work at a lower club essentially, because he would bring in stability. I think they would always stay up, and for the most part, I think they would play some pretty good football. So, but again, it's such a change from how they've been playing with Hodgson. I don't necessarily know if now is the right time to do it, but if they do have a big game coming up with Sheffield, and I think I mentioned it even after the Liverpool game where Palace looked good, and they probably were unlucky not to get a point in that game. I looked at their schedule. I remember doing that, and Palace have done really well to somewhat survive that schedule. They drew Man City. They got points. They beat Brentford. They got some points off someone else too. And at the same time, they're not far away from being in that uh-oh zone where if they lose, say to Sheffield this coming Tuesday or this coming weekend, things do get sticky. To say the least. Maybe it is coming Tuesday because it is an FA Cup weekend. So there's that to kind of lead off with. There's not a ton to say about the actual game. Uh, I do want to say a couple of the chances though. There was a really good through ball by Zinchenko. I think you see what Arsenal have been missing with Zinchenko missing some games. I think what I think is it. Confirmed some of my theories a little bit to why Arsenal have been struggling. A couple of these games they've been trying. Either it was Tomiyasu or maybe it was uh, is it Sabaneri? No, it was starts with a K. Kirwar. It was Kirwar, and that wasn't really working out. So you see what he does. So he picks out a Trossard makes a run behind. Martinelli didn't even start this game. Trossard makes a great run in behind, and Zinchenko just has a really good through ball. He sees the vision, and he's able to play it quickly. And then basically they score on the corner kick from that. So Gabriel just like towers over Chris Richards, and it's unfortunate for Richards because he kind of gets dunked on. Gabriel is quite tall and he's able to get quite high up himself, but he's also jumping on his shoulder. And there's no VAR, no one really looked at it, so I guess it was allowed. And then they nearly scored on another corner kick. Anytime Arsenal had a corner kick, it was a danger moment. And the problem for Palace was they were playing a lot of men behind the ball. They're playing really, really defensively, so Arsenal weren't able to create a whole ton of like open goal chances. But Arsenal were able to get a lot of corner kicks, whether or not it'd be a shot that would be blocked out of bounds or a cross. Arsenal were able to get a lot of corner kicks, and the problem for Palace was they couldn't defend corner kicks to save their lives. Arsenal were a really good side at doing this. I think they even said they're maybe the best in the league, but the Palace were just dreadful at defending this, and it really doesn't make sense because someone like Anderson is good in the air as well. You don't really imagine why Palace would struggle defending this way, but they did. And then we did have a couple chances for Palace, a couple like distance shots from Lerma, nothing really to trouble Raya. One of them actually was Raya's fault. I think Raya even had a bad pass and passed it right to Jefferson Lerma, then made a really good save to make up for that error. And then we have the second one, and I have Gabriel, but apparently it's a Henderson own goal. But again, it's a corner kick. Gabriel does well, but it's all about the delivery by Saka. Saka has a really good corner delivery. I didn't really realize, and I honestly think it's curling in by itself. It maybe doesn't even need a touch, but Gabriel is there to make sure anyways, and basically he heads it sideways and it bakes off Henderson to go in. And then they have a chance for Jesus in the box, and the only thing here is he gets in such a good position, but he's late to pull the trigger, and he takes a couple too many touches, and by the time he shoots it, he basically hits the side net. Uh, I mean, my halftime thought was Palace looked a completely beaten and broken side, but at the same time they looked like this was Man City, and in the 70th minute in that game, they were able to somehow draw level at the end of it. So it wasn't done and dusted until Arsenal got the third goal, and then, funny enough, they got the third goal by Palace having a corner kick themselves, and it basically they able to the first ball comes in and they're able to somewhat recycle possession, and then Will Hughes has is on the ball and he has a weak cross. It's just looped in. It's really easy for Raya to read, and he does really well to catch it. And then he quickly throws it upfield. And then Arsenal there are just allowed to break quickly upfield, counter, and man, did they transition well. And Raya picks out Jesus all alone, and Jesus then makes a pretty good run. And Jesus has a really good ball to pick out Martinelli, who had since come on at this point, or it's Trussard, who picks out Trussard, who's making a run kind of, side by side with him. But their defenders in the way. So what Jesus does is he basically curls the ball around the defenders to pick out at Trussard, and then Trussard does a really good job to chop inside, and then one touch he's able to lift it over the keeper. This is another one of those cases where Trussard, you don't really know where to play him, but he's probably their best pure finisher on the team. So I don't really know what that means. I don't necessarily know if I love him playing instead of Martinelli, because obviously you saw what Martinelli was able to do when he came on. And Trussard doesn't always work at playing through the middle because he can sometimes be bullied off the ball. But when you're in the box, usually Trussard's got one of the best finishes and best heads. Best calming heads on him than anyone else. Someone like Havertz, I don't think necessarily finishes this. Jesus maybe doesn't necessarily finish this. Uh, so I think it's worth kind of calling that out. And then basically, let's see. The 3-0 that pretty much killed the game. Arsenal, they made some changes after this. Nketiah came on, Jesus off. Martinelli came on for Trossard. ESR came on for Havertz, which was pretty cool. And then Declan Rice was showing some tightness, and Jorginho came on for him. And in the 94th minute, Arsenal do get a goal with Martinelli. And I want to touch on this a little bit because Saka here wins the ball, passes it to Nketiah, and Nketiah turns and runs to the Palace back line, and he draws James Tompkins' attention to him. And then that's when Nketiah slips a really nice ball to Martinelli to run onto, and Martinelli finishes the 1v1 chance. Pretty good. He goes hard and low to the corner. I think it's good to see Nketiah get an assist. You still don't really know what Brentford are going to do with him. There was talks that Palace are looking at maybe trying to buy him, but Arsenal will have a pretty big price tag on him. But he did something similar to for Brighton, from what I remember. I think he actually helped Havertz get a goal. So Nketiah hasn't always been Arsenal's fans' favorite, but when he plays, he makes stuff happen. In my opinion, just sometimes you just aren't able to always get him the ball. And then the other thing was Martinelli's second. The one I want to touch on is what Jorginho does. And so, unfortunately for Hodgson, losing 3-0 at the Emirates is not that bad, even though you were never really competitive. The five burger hurts. And here, because the two goals happened in garbage time essentially. So here, Jorginho has come on, and it- I think he does the kind of ball that I don't think Rice would have done. So Saliba wins the ball, passes it to Jorginho, and then Jorginho takes a look upfield and floats a perfect ball to Martinelli to run onto behind the Crystal Palace back line, where he then finishes another 1v1 chance, hard and low. Palace just completely forgot about Mark and Martinelli in those final 5 minutes. But the ball that Jorginho hits is perfect, and it's over the top. It's lifted. It's on time. I don't think someone like Declan Rice does this kind of pass. Now, not to say that Jorginho works better than Rice, but in situations, you probably want someone like a Jorginho or a Thomas Partey to be in this, or Zinchenko to be in that position to play that ball and to see it, than Rice, who maybe doesn't see it, maybe wants to go more side to side. Now, in the 95th minute, it doesn't really matter if you go side to side, but those are the slight kind of differences that can matter in bigger contests, in more competitive contests, I guess I can say. And speaking of Thomas Partey, it looks like they might actually have him back. I think I saw him being good and started to be in training again, and so maybe we'll see him in the second half of the season. And for Martinelli, as insignificant as I'm making these two goals to be, they're not, because scoring can give you a player confidence. And Martinelli had something like 15, 16 goals last season in the league, and he's struggled this season. Now I don't. I've given my predictions why. That no Granit Xhaka to make those overlaps with. The Havertz hasn't necessarily worked out with him. He's kind of had to do a lot of his own. Players, teams basically know what Martinelli and soccer are all about, so maybe they're kind of game planning a little bit around them instead, and trying to make Arsenal beat them with Jesus instead. There are a lot of reasons, but at least here, Arsenal were able to get in behind, able to get a couple of those transition goals, and Martinelli was showing he can finish. So I don't think that is insignificance. And Trossard scored, so the guy that played in front of him, that's always good for motivation. And so it was a weird game, because it was a game of set pieces for the most part, even for the third goal, and not a ton of open play. But at the same time, I thought Arsenal did play better. So there are a couple of I thought I saw some good improvement with their movement. I thought Zinchenko back did prove a little bit of my theory, what I thought with them, at least in possession. Because making those runs, you need someone to be able to see it and be able to play it. Or there are a couple of times when I thought Zinchenko was able to quickly see Odegaard getting behind in space, and you're able to find Odegaard the ball a little bit further ahead than necessarily Odegaard having to drop deep. So I thought the balance was a little bit better. There were a couple of times when Ben White made an overlap, and that allowed Saka to maybe cut inside and be a little bit more dangerous, and Saka having to do it all by himself, or Odegaard having to just be an overlap option where Odegaard would be better, probably a little bit closer to the box. So I thought the movement was a little bit better. Now it didn't necessarily lead to a ton. They did finish with 21 shots, but they had 8 shots and one on target in the first half. Uh, and basically they scored from the corner kicks. They did finish with 6 on target, so that's good. 12 for Crystal Palace, 5, but it didn't really feel like they had a threat. 0.3 xG. I don't. There were a couple. There was one where Raya had to make a pretty good save on Jefferson Lerma, but Raya basically passed it to Lerma. It was like Arsenal's mistake. It wasn't like Palace did a whole lot. I mean, Eze was looking lively. That was like the one player that was doing stuff for them, but he can only do so much. So this was rough. I mean, Arsenal did finish with 6 full chances in the second, all the way through. 61% possession, 487 passes, 87% accuracy. And the thing to say about the second half was ESR came on, and he didn't have a ton of looks, but you saw him playing a little bit centrally. You saw him, playing deeper. I I'm trying to think back to when ESR played basically his last game, and it was versus Sheffield. Now it was Hickenbottom Sheffield. It's a Sheffield that was leaking goals for days. I think Arsenal even won that game 5-0. And Nketiah had a hat trick that game. ESR was played in that kind of left, almost like that shocker role. He basically played in that Havertz spot, and he recognized when Nketiah was playing, was making runs and was basically playing him in. He was in ESR was or Emil Smith Rowe was making Nketiah the focal point of the attack, not just a side piece. And I think maybe I don't necessarily know when Arsenal have they're not in the FA Cup, so they're not going to play for a bit. I would like to see, and they have Liverpool coming up soon, so maybe after that. I think Arteta should experiment a little bit with ESR and Encadia as kind of a duo. If Smith Rowe can go for them, there's been talks maybe they might even sell him. I think he used to be a bit of a like an attacking mid kind of player. Yeah, he'd play out wide, but he doesn't really have the pace to do that. So he's more of a ball to feet player. If he can learn how to play that midfield role, do a little more defensive work, play a little bit without the ball, requires more running, but he's had time to learn a different position. He becomes different for them because he makes stuff happen. He's good with the ball at his feet. He's not afraid of it. Uh, he'll he's good with carrying the ball, and he'll drop people onto you, and that'll open things others. That'll open things for others. And I just think Arsenal have missed something like that, and Havertz haven't hasn't really worked out. I don't need to do that kind of basically rant all over again. The Declan Rice injury is coming at an interesting time too because Thomas Partey is returning to possibly train. So maybe we have Declan Rice and Partey together versus Liverpool. We'll have to see. Uh, it's worth forgetting, but the reason why basically Arsenal beat Man City at the Emirates early in October was it was like one of the few games Thomas Partey was able to come on as a kind of a bench option, and he plays a ball to Tomiyasu making a run, and then Tomiyasu heads it to Declan Rice, where they get the Martinelli goal or the Ake own goal, and it's the ball that Thomas Partey is able to play, and again, I don't necessarily have to do my rant again, but that's been my theory to why Arsenal have been different this season than last. Is Thomas Partey is really good at progressing the ball, where they haven't really had that this season. And then let's see, they have Nottingham Forest next. So Forest, and then the rematch with Liverpool. And for the most part, they caused Liverpool problems in that FA Cup game. I'm not going to be, at least in that first half, I'm not going to be shy and I'm not going to be delusional and say that that's not the case. That absolutely was the case. And then with here, this didn't feel like a 5-0 kind of game. And but you still have to play till the whistle. So there's some of that too. And with Forest have given them fits. So Arsenal might want to really and Forest are going to be desperate to make as many points as they can because they don't know what the sanction is going to be if it's going to happen this season or happen next summer. Uh, but Forest, Forest basically are responsible for giving City the title last season. No, at least making it officially because they beat not they beat Arsenal at the Forest ground last season, late sometime in April, and they gave Arsenal a pretty good go of it in the opener. I think Arsenal won 2-1, but Forest made Arsenal scare a little bit. So there's some of that. And then with Crystal Palace, it is unfortunate for them for the Olise injury happening at the absolute worst time because it's another hamstring injury. You really don't know how long that's going to be able. Sometimes that happens with someone that's had an injury for a long time. Is they pick up injuries elsewhere? Maybe it's overcompensating for something, and it's come at the worst time for them, to say the least. And so I'll do the same thing that I haven't done with Crystal Palace that I did with Brentford and Forest. So 21 games played. Let's see, or 21 points, 21 games played, 14th place. They did drop Brighton, so they did a good job to do that. Even got the first goal, but then Danny Welbeck was able to score with a really good header. So unlucky with that. I thought they were unlucky with Chelsea. They got a late PK awarded to them, but Chelsea probably did deserve it. I think they were something like 6 big chances that game. Like Chelsea didn't have Sterling and didn't have Cole Palmer. I think Madueke even had the PK. And then they looked really good versus Brentford in that 3-1 win. Lewis Potter scored the first goal, and so they were able to come back in that game. And so, goal scored, we have 18th place. That's not great. Conceded, they're in 10th. But that is kind of what Hodgson is. He's hard he's hard to score on, but you don't always get the offensive production. Edward is on 6 goals, and for the most part, he hasn't been playing. They've been going with Mateta. So that's been kind of an issue. Olise's second on 2 goals, and he's missed pretty much, 78, I don't know, 88% of the season. Players of the season, I already mentioned them. I'm gonna call out Chris Richards because losing to Corey was not easy for them to lose. And Chris Richards had come in and he's playing a different position. Now he didn't play this way versus Arsenal. I don't know why, actually. They probably should have. They would have done maybe better, but because they played him in a back three again, and that didn't really work out. But Chris Richards has been playing in midfield for the most part of this season, and he's not done a bad job. So it's worth calling that out because when you lost to Corey, you feared the absolute worst for them, uh, and that's somewhat been okay. But they have a big game now with Sheffield. They're close enough in the table where they lose that game. I think it will only be 2 or 3 points away from Sheffield. So and without Elise having that hamstring injury, that's not going to be an easy game. And then I'll finish off with Brighton and Wolves. Don't have to talk about the game really because it finished 0-0, and that's what I kind of like doing. I've spoken a little bit about both, so I don't necessarily have to do a ton of rundown. In this game, Brighton, you see Brighton are still without a bunch of players, and this was one of the more entertaining games uh, early in the season, last season, or early in the season this season. I think back in August. I think it ended like Brighton 4-1. Uh, but that game they had in CISO, and I think he was responsible for all 4 goals. They had Sully Marsh that came in, and he was able to explode, got a couple goals as well. And with Wolves, you came into this game without Wang Lei Chen, who's away to Asia Cup. Lost, but they lost. You're able to get back Pedro Neto. Lost back to injury. He's able to make his first start, and man, did he look good. I mean, Wolves set up to basically bully Brighton a little bit. They had everyone behind the ball, and they basically were asking Mateus Cunha and Pedro Neto to just counter to a counter versus Brighton as much as possible. Run with the ball just all the way down the wing, and they got a number of pretty good looks. They probably if anyone should have probably gotten points in this game, I think it would have been Wolves. Brighton set up, and they just couldn't break anyone down, and that's sometimes been kind of the issue with Roberto De Zerbi. Um, and so I mean, we saw don't necessarily need to. So yeah, we saw Gary Neville set up with a back three, which he hasn't always done, and he had Toddy Gomez basically man marking. It was Facundo Bornetta out of the game, and they had they had a lot of men behind the ball, but it was just really hard for them to do anything out wide. They're missing all of their best attackers out wide. No Adengra, no Matoma, no Isiso, no Sully Marsh, and they just don't. They're thin. They're thin in those wide areas. You're playing Yao Pedro on the wing as opposed to he's probably your best scorer at the moment, and so we're kind of forcing him to kind of be a creator as opposed to scoring, and Wolves kind of set up that way, and any kind of ball that was sent in, that the center backs were doing well to handle it, and for the most part, Brighton just Brighton pumped them, I guess I'll say, back in August, and I think O'Neill remembered that. He set up to basically make sure that wouldn't happen again, and Brighton struggled. It's one thing for Brighton. Usually, Brighton are uh, trying to manipulate and get other teams to come at them when they're pressing and playing from the back. But Wolves didn't really care about that. Now they were setting up a little bit in the beginning, but after Brighton got the ball past the midway line, they were facing basically a mid block, and they could not really, or I guess even in the final third, and they couldn't really find a way to get through it. And Brighton had a lot of the ball; I think they had like 70% of it, but they just nothing was really coming in. They only had they had 11 shots and only 4 on target. Wolves only had 8 shots and 3 on target. The XG was about 1 apiece. Wolves, I thought, had better counter moments. So yeah, it was kind of the case of that. And with Wolves, it's just really good for Pedro Neto to not only be back, but it looks like he hasn't lost his pace with that hamstring injury. He looked as good as possible. And if you think a team is going to look at someone in the off season, or maybe not necessarily January, but maybe in the summertime, I'm thinking of a club like Barcelona. I'm thinking like that kind of stature of a club that needs an attacking wide player that has pace for days that can play on the right side or the left side. I think you should look at Pedro Neto. I really do, because the fear has been him having a couple of those injuries
would he lose his pace? And it looks like he hasn't, and he hasn't lost his confidence either. And then Mateus Cunha does a lot of really good things as well. He just lacks the finishing. Uh, and then Lamania was able to, he made a couple of runs and had a shot or two that forced a pretty good save. So without Wang, so you're about to possibly get him back after the Asia Cup. All of a sudden, Wolves look quite Wolves, O'Neal is close to getting his favorite, front three attacking threat all over again, and not enough can be said about Yao Gomez and Mario Lamina this season. So O'Neal has done an amazing job with a side that probably a lot of people did predict to struggle. Maybe not necessarily go down, but struggle. I mean, Wolves had one of the worst worst seasons to end the season last season with Lopetegui, and they fired him or he didn't want to return, and you didn't know what they were going to do. It's not like they were able to bring anyone in this season either, as far as players. Yeah, I think they've been under financial fair play for the last season or two, and so the job that Gary O'Neill has done has been really remarkable. It works out too because you don't necessarily want Bournemouth to feel like they were right to get rid of O'Neill. Uh, I think it's worked out for both parties. O'Neill has shown himself to be quite adept and quite able to handle this. And so, what he did with Bournemouth last season wasn't just a lucky runoff. I think a lot of people wanted to maybe discredit it. He doesn't really have. He didn't seem like he had necessarily coaching experience, head coaching experience, before taking over for Bournemouth as a caretaker manager last season. And he's come into Wolves and been every bit as good. So awesome to see. And I do think, barring some serious injuries, they should be more than safe, and that should have been the goal. I don't know as far as ambition goes, going forward, but at least for now, they should be okay. And then with Brighton, again, just the players that they have unavailable is just too much. And the way that they're using Al Pedro's probably been their leader as since November and December. Danny Welbeck hasn't really been able to get on the score sheet much, and neither has Ferguson. El Pedro has been able to really take them over the line in some of these cases. Also, they were struggling to with that kind of fullback role, like I mentioned last season or last week, and it wasn't until they basically started to trust that Henselwood player to play right back, where their form started to change a little bit, and because in the middle you don't really know what to do either. They're missing Carlos Beba hasn't really worked out. Mahoud Dahoud hasn't necessarily worked out so far this season. They're missing the midfield losses of Casado and Alexis. Just you can't ignore it. It is there. It's missing Levy Colwell. They haven't had the same like it hasn't been like for like. So it makes sense for them to suffer a little bit of a drop. It is interesting that it looks like they've made a signing of Valentin Barco, a 19-year-old from Boca Juniors. So, with those losses not working out, maybe I don't necessarily know if we won't be able to see him till the summertime, or maybe he actually comes in and plays right away. I've seen a lot of people praising him, so we maybe could see that, and that could be maybe the little kind of Alexis McAllister kind of replacement because the other guys hasn't necessarily worked out. Billy Gilmore needs someone next to him, and because Pascal Gross and Billy Gilmore together, really good in possession as a duo, but out of possession they are a bit of a liability. And one thing to say too is they do have Enciso back. I mean, not Enciso. They do have Estupian back, and they've really struggled without him as well. And so that's kind of where we're at with Brighton. And let's see. Oh, the last moment I have is sometimes, I mean, it's a bit like what Pep said last week. Sometimes you can have all the tactic build up play, all the manipulation you want to get you in good positions to maybe score, but usually it comes down to getting a player to make a man miss. Get that mismatch. And sometimes Brighton just don't necessarily have that. And all their best creative players, Matoma, Marsh, Adingra, Isiso, were missing and not available, and there's only so much that you can cope with that. So I think there's not necessarily to be negative, but that is maybe some of it. They've had the back to back games where they haven't been able to score. I think they also were scoreless versus West Ham. So just a little of something that's going on, and it's probably just a blip, but it's something to maybe focus on. So we'll have to see. and then so that's it. So that's where we are for the week 21 review. We spanned it over 2 episodes, and we're able to get a couple of the other clubs some time. I think I spent some time on Sheffield, spent some time on Bournemouth, and I mean spent some time on Brentford and Nottingham Forest, which I'm pretty happy about. And so that'll be it. It's FA Cup week, but we turn around and it'll be kind of a midweek EPL week. So I'll probably do another episode late. I'll probably do one maybe Thursday or Friday again. So be on the lookout for that, and then that'll be it. So until then, you stay squatting and stop recording.